Okay, we've started the live stream.
Okay, great. So I'm going to call to order the Permit Review Committee on the Commission on Chicago Landmarks. Today's date, Thursday, May 7th. Let me start with the roll call of PRC commission members. Commissioner Djukanovic.
Here.
Commissioner Hughes.
Present.
Commissioner Aguirre.
Here.
And Commissioner Osmond.
Here.
Great. Pursuant to the ordinance adopted by the Chicago City Council on April 24th, 2020, and in response to the COVID-19 public health emergency, Rafael Leon, chairman of the Commission on Chicago Landmarks, issued emergency rules governing the conduct of remote public commission meetings and provisions for remote public participation, which were posted on the commission's website. In line with these emergency rules, today's regular meeting of the Permit Review Committee is a virtual meeting being simulcast to the general public via live streaming. This is the first time the commission meetings have been held virtually, and as a result, there are limits to our technical capabilities, as you just saw. With this in mind, members of the general public were encouraged to submit written statements in advance of the meeting, and these have been posted on the commission's website. Those members of the public desiring to speak at today's meetings were required to register before the meeting. Verbal statements by the public for all agenda items will take place at the beginning of the meeting to minimize the chance for technical issues. Applicants and their representatives, as well as aldermen, were required to contact staff if they desire to speak, and they will be able to do so after the staff presentation on a specific project. At this time, all those who are provided instructions regarding how to speak at today's virtual meeting should follow them and be ready to speak. I will call upon you at the appropriate time. First, I'd like to take public comments for today's for item number 1 on today's agenda. I'll call out the agenda item and the names of the person who have requested to speak. Members of the public will be limited to 3 minutes each. So regarding agenda item number 1, the project located at 900 West Fulton Market. One person has registered to speak, Mr. Miller. If we could hear from you, please.
Yes, good afternoon, Commissioner Wong. Can you hear me?
I sure can.
All right, Ward Miller with Preservation Chicago. We very much support the idea and reuse of this property on Fulton Market and support the staff recommendation. We just wanted to be clear that that there's several important buildings that are part of this complex and adjacent buildings that we're concerned about. The corner building, which was the Neely building at 900 West Fulton, is an important building and a corner building that we certainly don't want to lose, as we've lost a number of these important structures over time. And also behind it, directly behind it, is an Adler and Sullivan building, which is not part of this project, but I just wanted to make sure that the commission was aware of this important building, one of the few remaining structures by Adler and Sullivan, and we don't want anything to happen to that building or any other buildings, including the facade of the building to the west that is to be preserved at the west portion of this development site. But just realizing the fragility of these structures and the vibration, we just want to make sure that every effort is taken to protect the historic resources that are to be retained. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Miller. Regarding agenda item number 2, the project at 8 South Michigan, one person has registered to speak, Mr. Miller. Ward?
Can you hear me?
Yes.
I'm sorry, we're
Please
having some
proceed.
technical difficulties here. Good afternoon again. Ward Miller with Preservation Chicago. The 8 South Michigan building, otherwise known as the Willoughby building, we very much support the idea of the replacement of the panels. We realize they're probably most likely rusted and causing some damage to the stonework and the structure itself. This is one where I think we very much support the staff recommendation and would like to see, as noted, the original colors of the panels restored in their replications, and was also trying to encourage that perhaps several of these panels, a limited number of them, could be preserved and reinstalled on the building. As we saw oftentimes before in other remodelings, sometimes to have an original feature or a series of them is important to retain for color, for any historical research that may happen in the past. We've seen the finials on the Wrigley building replaced several times over the course of the last 30 to 40 years. And I think it's really important to maintain some sort of integrity or original panels where possible, perhaps on the lowermost floors of the building or in several areas on the Michigan Avenue facade. However, we do realize the need to replace a majority of them because of building issues. So we just want to recommend that this be handled very sensitively and that samples be submitted and approved by the commission and the staff as normal process. This is an important building at Chicago's street wall, if you will, that is visible from Lakeshore Drive and the park and the lakefront. And it's so important to retain that, the character of these buildings that we all fought very hard to bring about this landmark district. So thank you so much, Commissioner.
Thank you, Mr. Miller. Nobody has requested to speak on agenda item number 3. On agenda item number 4, the project located at 2004 South Troop. One person has registered to speak, Mary Lou Seidel. Can we hear from you, please?
Yes, can you hear me?
Sure can. Thank you.
Great. Thank you, Chairman and members of the Permit Review Committee. Mary Lou Seidel with Preservation Chicago. We concur with the staff recommendation finding this proposed addition and additional site work not meeting the criteria set forth in the rules and regulations regarding alterations to an existing contributing structure within a landmark district. The scale and setback of the homes within the proposed Pilsen Landmark District are important to the integrity of the district as a whole. Allowing for future alterations that respect that scale and setback is essential to retaining the character of the district and the Pilsen community. We look forward to working with the Pilsen community, the staff at the Department of Planning and Development, and the Commission on Chicago Landmarks on establishing criteria to address site issues such as these that are present here in the future. Thank you for your consideration of this testimony.
Thank you, Ms. Seidel. Nobody has requested to speak on agenda item number 5. Regarding agenda item number 6, the project located at 560 West Fullerton. One person has registered to speak. Mr. Miller, again, please.
Yes, good afternoon again, Mr. Chairman, members of the Permit Review Committee. Ward Miller with Preservation Chicago. We very much concur with the opinion of the landmark staff that any type of modification to the structure to include a curb cut and any alterations to the Fullerton Avenue, Fullerton Parkway facade of this building would really be detrimental to not only the building, but to the district. This is a marvelous district of on a tree-lined street, part of the Mid-North District. And it's really important to maintain that character and not lose the front yards, the gardens, the parkways with all the mature trees. And this would set a precedent for other homeowners along that stretch. And we just think that this is really incongruous to the street and to the landmark district. And so therefore, we really support the decision to deny this request to actually literally plow a driveway and a garage door into the Fullerton Avenue facade at this site. It's also a pedestrian street, and it's also close to a corner. It's near the corner of Geneva Terrace and Fullerton, and we feel that that really does create a dangerous situation for pedestrians and cars coming in and out of that garage. We also want to encourage this building, which is really a remarkable structure, but has seen so many remodelings over time. We really want to encourage the homeowners to restore the building to its grandeur. And it is an amazing structure. It's just had so many alterations over time. It would be really important to restore the building. This has been an issue and truly an eyesore for a very long time, decades. And it would be really wonderful to have a sensitive renovation and restoration of the building, and perhaps landmark funds, adopt the landmark funds could be used to help with the repairs of the front facade, remove some of the permastone and some of the cinder block infills. This is an early district, and it's a very important district, and it's a wonderful district and a fabulous component of Lincoln Park, the Lincoln Park neighborhood. So thank you so much for considering this.
Thank you, Mr. Miller. That is all of the speakers that signed up to speak for the commission meeting. We've also received statements from members of the public who do not wish to speak. Comments from the following people will be posted on our website for review. That includes Alderman Michelle Smith, Jonathan Fine, Miguel Chicon, Eulalio Contreras, the Armitage Halsted Landmark District Community Advisory Committee, Yolanda Cabello, Edna Vasquez, Mark Hooper, Quinton Primo III, and Landmarks Illinois. We'll now go through the agenda. So we need, the first thing I should have started with was the approval of the minutes from the previous meeting. This was the regular meeting from March 5th, which you had in your packets. So I'd like to call for a motion to approve those meeting minutes. Can I get a motion?
So moved.
That
Second,
was so
Commissioner
moved by
Hughes.
Commissioner Hughes.
and
and
seconded by Commissioner Osmond.
All in favor? Commissioner Osmond,
Aye.
Commissioner Jakiewicz,
Aye.
Commissioner Aguirre,
Aye.
and Commissioner Hughes.
Aye.
And I'm Commissioner Wong. The motion carries unanimously. And just for the record, I forgot to do roll call. Oh, I did do roll call, sorry.
Chairman Wong, I have a quick comment
Yes, please.
regarding the agenda. I will have to recuse myself from item 4. I'm acquainted with the applicant, so just please, either to the staff or yourself, if you can guide through recusal protocol and virtual meeting.
Thank you, Commissioner Aguirre. And I believe
Commissioner Wong.
in this case, by recusing yourself, I believe what we're doing is just just muting you on this. Is that correct? Deanna? Michael? Kamal?
Yes. Sorry. Yes, we can mute Commissioner Aguirre, and it might be best if you get a chance, Commissioner, to drop an email to staff, just so they can put it in the written record too.
Okay.
Chairman Wong, I also, if I could make a comment.
Yes, please.
Alderman Cicho Lopez is present. I know your intention was to ask him if he wanted to make a statement after the presentation of this particular project, but he has raised his hand, and if you might ask if he wishes to speak now or if he wishes to continue with how you planned it and have him speak later during the project.
Okay. No, that'd be great. Commissioner Sigcho Lopez, is it your desire to speak now on item number 4, or would you like to speak after the presentation?
So I just wanted a point of clarification. Is the when?
Excuse me, I'm sorry, I didn't hear you.
Okay, here. I just wanted to, I'm just activating my video now, but I just wanted to, for point of clarification, at what point of the agenda are we gonna have the presentation? It depends how long it takes, because I have a meeting at 3 p.m. So I just want to make sure that I will obviously like to see the presentation as well, but just in the interest of time, if this is, if this is going to be past 3, maybe I can make my statement now.
Yeah. So it was scheduled to be item number 4. I could push it or make a change and do that item number right now, if that would work for you.
If that's possible, that way, I think that way, I can hear the presentation, and
Okay.
that would be ideal if possible.
Let me see, hang on. Let me see if the staff would be able to do that, or whether we've had everything put into order. Deanna, is that something you could answer?
We can change the order, Commissioner, and the applicant is here as well, so there's no issue there.
Okay. Why don't we go
Thank
ahead
you.
and we do that then? So we're gonna switch item number 4 to right now. This is the property located at 2004 South Troop. And this is the item, if I understand this correctly, Commissioner Aguirre, you are recusing yourself. Okay.
That's correct.
This is in the proposed Pilsen Historic District. This is a proposed 2-story addition to an existing 2-story masonry cottage with additional site work. Emily, I'm going to call on you to make that presentation, please.
Definitely. Thank you, Commissioner. So the Commission on Chicago Landmarks voted on and transmitted the final landmark recommendation to City Council for the proposed district, as you know. Staff has met with the owner of 2004 South Troop a number of times to explore preliminary ideas for his property, which is a 2-story workers' cottage with a significant front setback. The owner considered the options previously discussed with staff, but ultimately determined that he would like to move forward with the pre-permit proposal being presented today for the committee's review and direction. So the subject building, it's a masonry workers cottage on a 100-foot deep lot. The cottage is set back approximately 60 feet from the front property line and has no rear yard setback. Currently, there are 13 other buildings within the proposed district with a substantial front setback, all of them cottages. In the district designation report, these 13 buildings, along with the subject property, were categorized preliminarily as contributing structures, but again, that is strictly a preliminary determination by staff, non-binding to the commission. Pending the final designation of the proposed Pilsen district, the commission intends to draft and adopt design guidelines specific to the district to address the unique characteristics and challenges predominantly found there. We acknowledge the difficulty of trying to expand properties such as this one. At this time, however, staff is only able to evaluate the proposed project pursuant to the Commission's general guidelines and the U.S. Secretary of the Interior Standards for Rehabilitation. So staff was able to locate a building permit issued on August 16th, 1887 for this address. The 1914 Sanborn map shows a 1-story building with basement in the same location as the current cottage. The 1950 Sanborn map shows a building of the exact same dimensions, materials, and Sanborn notations as the building on the 1914 map. At the rear of the lot, Based on this information, staff believes that the current building was constructed in 1887 and retains its overall scale, footprint, and location on the lot. So again, as a reminder, the significant features outlined in the final district recommendation are all exterior elevations, including roof lines of buildings visible from the public rights of way. In this case, that primarily means the front elevation and the gable roof line. The proposed project includes the removal of the existing roof and construction of an approximately 21-foot tall rooftop addition. This would nearly double the height of the existing cottage to approximately 40 feet tall and would be located directly behind the existing brick facade and cornice detailing. This addition is proposed to be constructed primarily of cementitious panel siding covered with a cementitious slatted rain screen. The fourth floor has an 11-foot 4-inch setback and is proposed to be clad in cedar siding. In addition to removing the roof of the existing building, staff assumes that substantial other structural modification will be required to construct the proposed addition atop an 1887 brick cottage. Here you can see the first and second floor would house 2 rental units, while the upper 2 floors will serve as a home to the applicant. We understand that this proposal also requires either approval from the Zoning Board of Appeals or a rezoning. So the proposed change to the historic building and its roofline resulting from the substantial structural demolition and construction of the large visible rooftop addition would destroy the significant historic and architectural features of the building and have an adverse effect on the property and district. It's also contrary to the Commission's guidelines on additions, which state, working within the existing envelope of a historic structure in order to accommodate space needs is always preferable to building an addition. Additions will be allowed only if they do not alter, change, obscure, damage, or destroy any significant features of the landmark or district. Of particular concern are the effects of an addition on a building's historic relationship to its site, on a building's size, shape, and roofline, and on individual design details, elements, or materials which constitute all or part of a building's significant features. The proposed project would also be contrary to standards 9 and 10 of the U.S. Secretary of the Interior Standards for Rehabilitation, which state that new additions shall not destroy historic materials, shall be compatible in design, and shall be undertaken in such a manner that if removed in the future, the essential form and integrity of the property would remain. The alteration of the historic roofline and the highly visible addition would destroy character-defining features of the property. Staff believes that the new addition, while differentiated, is not compatible with the massing, size, or scale of the historic cottage. And because the roof is proposed to be removed, if this addition were removed in the future, the essential form and integrity of the property would be impaired. So along with the proposed rooftop addition, the applicant is proposing to add a visible solid front stair to the east and south facades and renovate an existing rooftop deck to the top of the non-historic portion of the first floor. The stair and deck will both be surrounded by a black metal fence railing. Staff recommends that the solid stair should not be approved as it obscures the cottage facade and is not compatible with the historic and architectural features of the district. The applicant is also proposing site work in the large front yard of the property, a 9-foot 4-inch tall gabion landscape wall, which is a wirework container filled with rock, broken concrete, or other material, is proposed in front of the cottage, which acts as a screen to block the first floor from view and runs nearly the entire width of the approximately 25-foot lot. A metal fence, Staff recommends that this element obscures historic features of the cottage and is not compatible with the architectural and historic features of the property and district. So that brings us to our staff recommendations. Staff recommends that the committee find that the proposed project to construct a 2-story addition atop the existing historic building and other proposed alterations does not meet the criteria set forth in the commission's rules and regulations, the commission's guidelines for alterations to historic buildings and new construction, and standards 1, 2, 5, 9, and 10 of the U.S. Secretary of the Interior Standards for Rehabilitation of Historic Buildings. And therefore, the project would have an adverse effect on the significant historical and architectural features of the proposed property and district. Staff further recommends that the committee advise the applicant consider alternative options to rehabilitate the property that would not destroy and adversely impact the roof line and other historic features of the building, such as a smaller, less visible rooftop addition set back from the front facade. Pending the final designation of the proposed Pilsen Historic District, the commission intends to draft and adopt design guidelines specific to the district, which address its unique characteristics and challenges. These guidelines should evaluate properties where existing structures are built towards the rear, such that additional options may be considered to accommodate further development of the property. So the alderman is here, and as is the owner and architect.
Great. Thank you, Emily. Do any members of the committee have any questions for Emily at this time? If so, please raise your hand. I cannot see everybody, so yeah. Let me go to this. Any questions of Emily at this time? I still can't see the the menu here. You can physically raise your hand like this too.
I have a question. This is Commissioner
Hughes.
Hughes. Thank you. Emily, have we identified, I understand the guidelines that have been set forth by the staff, and they seem to comply and work well with buildings that have an actual rear yard. And so has the staff identified acceptable ways of additions for buildings that sit back with the large front yards like this one?
Well, so we are planning, provided the district moves forward and gets approved, those unique guidelines. We have a similar kind of setup for Fulton Market that allows visible rooftop additions. It's just for that particular district, and we'd like to do something similar for Pilsen that addresses some things like this. We fully acknowledge they are a challenge with the current guidelines and standards.
Okay, sounds good. Thank you.
Commissioner Osmond.
Yeah, with the proposed ADU ordinance, would that allow for an accessory dwelling unit to be built in front of it?
Potentially. I haven't looked at it yet, but I think it's a little bit of a different scenarios because it's a primary building that's being built instead of an accessory building, but potentially that would be something that would help Pilsen, would be in character with the district.
Okay. If no other questions by the committee, you can always come back. But I'd like to hear from the applicant, if he could present his.
Yes, can you hear me?
Yes. So this is owner and the architect, Joel Putnam.
Yes.
Correct?
Yes, that is correct. Thank you.
All right, thank you.
Thank you all for your time and consideration and for your attention to all the previous material shown and for the opinions that have been expressed. Unlike other proposals seen today and in the past for Pilsen, Catherine and I don't come to you with a request for demolition. We are in fact committed to rehabilitating our home, but not historically accurately restoring it, which I think is where some of the issues lie. We are committed to living in Pilsen, to raising a child and sending him or her to the school directly across the street from our home. We're committed to our neighbors, to our friends, and to spending money locally. We have, and we will continue to be committed to the community that has so graciously taken us in. Many today have spoken of the need to get the citizens of Pilsen excited and involved about this potential district. And in fact, we are involved. We are excited. We are attempting to work within a framework that's not yet set. We in fact brought Jonathan Fine, the former founder and executive director of Preservation Chicago, in to help advise us on this proposal. I know he provided a letter, a glowing letter. Many of our neighbors have seen that the drawings and renderings, and having been in our home many times over the years, have asked us why we are proposing such expensive renovations to what they deem an eyesore. Many have asked why we do not seek to demolish it. Much like our commitment to the community, we believe that a commitment to the laws that govern our society are in place for strong reasons. Although we take issue with many of the points that's proposed for the Historic District of Pilsen, we recognize that there is a need to do something to address the issues facing our community. Among them is the need to curb the thoughtless development running rampant. This past year, while driving to pick up his mother from her job one Sunday evening, our neighbor's son was senselessly gunned down, and as a result, their lives are forever changed. Rather than addressing the real issues Pilsen faces, we find ourselves here today arguing over the appropriateness of one particular choice in the style of a hat to another. Next slide, please. In November of 2017, Catherine and I purchased property with the intention to undertake some form of major construction project. Our goals among them, having a long-term family home, has been and will continue to be to maximize the zoning allowances for our property, as well as introducing as many rental units as possible. Pilsen's facing a housing shortage. Much of the US is facing a housing shortage. At that time, we reached out to the previous alderman's office, as any work would and will need to go before the zoning department. Alderman Solis, at that time, Alderman Solis's instructions to us were that everyone involved needed to make money, and that because it was an election year, we would need to wait for him to win an election, because he did not want to anger any voters by taking our project to the zoning board. Thankfully, he didn't win. However, shortly after the election, we received a notice of the proposal for the historic district. And along with attempting to install a city water meter, we have effectively been stuck in a bureaucratic nightmare coming up on 3 years now. Catherine and I take issue with the CCL staff.
Mr. Putnam, if you could speak into the microphone, please.
Yes. Catherine and I take issue with the CCL staff statement that we're adding 2 stories, when in fact we're only adding 1. We're proposing that the current 3rd floor attic, which is enclosed interior and conditioned space, which prior to our ownership was used as a bedroom, to be adjusted to have a continuous full height ceiling. We are as well proposing the addition of the 4th floor. CCL staff states that by the adjustment to the 3rd floor ceiling and the addition of the 4th floor, we are destroying the historic character of a building. We say our design clearly expresses and celebrates the existence of the original cottage, not destroying it. Likewise, some in our neighborhood would argue that the addition of a historic district would destroy Pilsen. Clearly, all of these statements are a matter of opinion and not fact. In addition to celebrating the character and charm of the original cottage, we have in fact set back the addition from the front facade, simply not to the arbitrary acceptance of CCL staff. As proposed, the district has yet to be officially voted on. We are currently operating within a purgatory-like set of rules, as there are no written guidelines. It is hard to argue that any sightline solution for a setback to our addition would materially change the proposal as viewed from the public right-of-way, other than taking away our zoning allowances for FAR. Unlike buildings in other districts, the sightline method has been applied to, our building is sited directly at the back of the lot and is in fact in the alley for the survey. Any sightline rules as applied in other districts would not allow for any addition to our home, period. Additionally, staff has asked us to consider moving the building from the front of the lot. Ward Miller recently spoke of the fragility of these old buildings in reference to agenda item number 1 in this meeting. Besides being near impossible due to the condition of the exterior load-bearing brick walls, as as well as ridiculously expensive, how does this not destroy the historic setbacks? How is one perceived historic characteristic prioritized over another? And how is this simply not a random result of an opinion by department staff playing designer with our money? Any rules, guidelines, and laws put in place should be reasonable, fair for all, and written in such a way as to provide for no interpretation. They must be objective and not subjective. Next slide, please. So we do acknowledge that we're adding a significant portion, which will be our home. But I do not believe that it's outside of the massing or character of our neighborhood. Next slide, please. So this is the boundary that was recommended to the city council. Next slide, please. This is a revised scenario showing that our home is no longer within a proposed boundary. This was recently recommended to Alderman Lopez. Next slide, please. This is another scenario also showing that our house is not in what would potentially be the district. Next slide, please. The house on the left, this was never within any proposed district. The house in the center has always been within the proposed district. And the house on the right, if any of the other two boundaries were to be placed into effect, would effectively be removed. Next slide, please. Through their revised recommendations, the Department of Planning and Development, and the Bureau of the Staff of Planning, Historic Preservation, and Sustainability have effectively concluded that our house isn't historic. Why would they make revised presentations if our house is no longer historic? And you know, clearly this is an issue that is difficult to even determine where the boundaries are. So we do take issue with the strict, stringent standards that are being imposed upon us. Next slide, please. So they acknowledge, and Emily graciously did acknowledge that this is difficult. We've been stuck for several years now, are simply coming to you because we're trying to move the process along for ourselves, but also for others. But we're repeatedly told that when it passes, guidelines will be put in place. When it passes, this is a blank check. No one would vote on a law that they didn't have in place or didn't understand before it was even written down, yet this is what we're being asked to do. Next slide, please. Also here, again, the city council will adopt this, but us, the local community, the citizens who have gone to many meetings, many public meetings, I've personally worked with the aldermen and others in the city to draft guidelines that we feel are important. One of those being, yes, preserve buildings, but more importantly, preserve the community, preserve the neighborhood, encourage additional housing, not discourage. But we're supposed to believe that those guidelines that we've already asked for, already worked with the aldermen and with others in the community, will be written after this vote's made. Next slide, please. Next slide, please. So I want to go through one by one and just talk about each of these. So this says that one of the points being made is that we're not using it for its historic purpose. Next slide, please. It will continue to be a home, workers' cottage. Next slide, please. The historic character shall be retained and preserved. The removal of historic materials, features, and spaces that characterize the property shall be avoided. Next slide, please. As Emily said, there's an existing brick addition in the front. We're proposing that we screen that through the use of gabions, and the screen is not to screen the building, and the portion that being obscured is already an addition that is not quote unquote historic, but to blend the staircase into the building. Most of the time, when you walk through Pilsen, homes that are set at the back like this have rather ugly stairs in the front of the building. We're trying to find a way to incorporate the stairs into the design of a building that's in a pleasing way. Next slide, please. Distinctive features, finishes, construction techniques, or examples of craftsmanship that characterize property shall be preserved. Next slide, please. we actually feel that we're preserving the distinctive character. It's, it is an old shake roof. Yes, we acknowledge that we're adding that, but we're celebrating that original design and drawing attention to what is the most unique feature of the home: the cornice, the brickwork, the rose carvings above the window. Next slide, please. New additions, exterior alterations, or related construction shall not destroy historic materials in such. New work shall be differentiated. So next slide, please. I can't imagine how it's any different. And our work is completely different. I acknowledge that. We're not destroying any defining characteristics. The addition has been specifically designed and detailed to be distinct yet harmonious. All new windows and doors will be hidden from view, which will affect the quality of the light in our home. But we think that adding punch windows everywhere would actually detract from the beauty of the old home. Next slide, please. New additions and adjacent or related new construction shall be undertaken in such a manner that if removed in the future, the essential form and integrity of the historic property and its environment would be unimpaired. Next slide, please. Emily stated that we would be placing the addition on top of the existing brick structure. That's not true. The brick structure is crumbling and falling down. It would not hold an addition. Furthermore, there's no interior walls. It's lath and plaster over the existing brick. There's no insulation. So we need to provide space for insulation, for new plumbing, for new electrical. And in addition, we're planning to completely pour new foundations and restructure the entire building internally. If a future owner wanted to remove the top 2 floors, they absolutely could. Next slide, please. So, as I said, we've gone around and we've talked to our neighbors. Everyone loves this. They actually tell us to demolish it. Here's one, is that they welcome positive change. They think it's positive change. Next slide, please. Miguel, he's a good friend. He also doesn't understand why they can't think that, this would be a good thing for the community. Miguel owns the building down the street. Next slide, please. Lalo is actually extremely worried about the designation because if strict rules are in place, he may be forced to sell his building. He's lived here 40 years. And he loves what we're doing. He actually told me to demolish it because he thinks it's an eyesore. Next building, please. Or sorry, next slide. Here's one where they think that all of the change is good, not negative. I mean, I don't want to go through all of these one by one, but I think it's important that we hear from the community. Next slide, please. And so Jonathan did send in a letter. As I said, he worked with us. After our initial meetings with staff, I took a step back. I'm an architect, I'm not a preservationist. So I called Jonathan, I asked him to come to the house, walk through it. I showed him our proposal. And we spent days in charrettes arguing over what we thought was appropriate, ultimately arriving at what we've come here with. And Jonathan started Preservation Chicago. He fought for Prentice. I mean, I think his opinion matters, and that's why we brought him in. And he's saying that this not only should this be approved, but maybe this is the model for the district, right? For how do we deal with these 13 homes? Because this is going to be a major issue. Next slide, please. And here we see 2 hats, right? Personally, the one on the left at 2006 South Throop is an eyesore. It destroys the building, and I would wear my hat any day. I think it's much more beautiful. Catherine and I believe that if the true goal is to preserve the historic character and use of the neighborhood, and in particular this building, the proposal before you now is the best possible solution to achieve that. The City Council will soon vote on the final outcome of the proposed historic district proposal. The vote very well could end up being a no. And even if it does pass, it would more than likely pass one of the currently proposed alternate boundaries, effectively making our home a non-historic structure. At such time, we would have no clear path forward. we could potentially be required to seek a demolition permit to achieve our needs for the property. As it stands now, the building currently doesn't conform to any zoning code. Although we recognize that we could continue with this plan and argue for a variance, any new work may need to be the result of strict compliance with zoning ordinances, meaning a new building in the front and parking in the rear. It is our hope that with your support, we can save this structure, but clearly without it, we simply may not be able to. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Putnam. Before I ask for the committee's questions of your presentation,
Yes.
and I'd like to hear from Alderman Sigcho Lopez. If you are ready to make your statement, sir.
Yes. Thank you. Thank you, Ernie. And I thank you for the different perspectives. As I have mentioned to you, and I spoke with the Planning Commission, the Department of Planning, about my concern that the landmark current proposal and the challenges that represents with homeowners like Joel and his family. Obviously, we want to talk about preservation. We want to make sure that we prevent from the rampant and unplanned development that was happening in the district for a long time. We certainly appreciate the efforts for preservation. The difficulty and my concern is on the restrictions that these represent to homeowners like Mr. Joel, who are working within the spirit of the proposal, which is to preserve the identity of the community. However, I am concerned with the restrictions and limitations that it represents to homeowners like Mr. Joel. And I think that I have heard similar, if not identical, concerns from other homeowners that see this proposal as having a restrictive effect that can have negative repercussions, especially with low-income homeowners that are right now, especially in the middle of a pandemic, struggling. I've seen, and Mr. Joel has brought up the proposal not only to our office, but as he has stated, he has even brought up to other preservation experts to do a good faith effort to comply with the desires of many of us who really care about preservation. We have had several public meetings and focus groups to have this discussion. We take preservation seriously. My concern remains to be the restrictive nature of the current proposal. Mr. Pullman himself is an architect, and I think he has a very good understanding of the spirit of the proposal, and also is going above and beyond, not only working with experts on his own proposal, but he has been very helpful in providing meaningful feedback in what we're trying to achieve here, which is the preservation of the community that goes beyond the buildings, but also the identity and social fabric of a community. It is always good to see families in the community that want to send their kids to their local schools, like Mr. Pullman has expressed, and also make sure that they are actively participating in the kind of policy that we want to see in our community. So I want to thank him for being part of the process, even before I took office, and being really trying to be helpful and mindful of the challenges that we have and try to comply. That's what I mean, support of his proposal, because it has put a lot of effort and resources, quite frankly, to be in compliance. And I think our advocacy has been in terms of providing flexibility to these kind of proposals to find a good balance. If the restrictive nature of the proposal becomes a burden to homeowners, I'm concerned about the effects that will have even on how homeowners perceive this kind of preservation alternatives. I now incline, and as I've seen, I've been part of this process now for over a year, for almost a year, to believe that this may not be the right approach to how we want to have preservation in our community. There certainly has to be more local consideration, and there are plans, including the quality of life plan that we have in our community that did not include or did not support the landmark designation, but we have been working on trying to make modifications that can help us overcome these challenges. But like this example clearly shows, and someone who is very knowledgeable, participated in the process, is trying to help. And even then, we seem to be running into significant issues that can become burdensome to the homeowners. So that's why I'm in support of this proposal. I always believe in consistency and precedent in policy and planning decisions. This is not a demolition, and that's what I have been in other proposals. I have not taken a position because I believe that we do need a better process and guidelines as how we review demolitions that are affecting our community. But this seems to be a concern. I'm supportive of this effort because, again, it has provided not only in his particular proposal, but for the district as a whole, significant care and resources, including his personal time working with us in the focus groups, public meetings, and going above and beyond to consult with preservation experts. So I'm supporting his proposal, and I hope that the commission considers the effects that this has on homeowners like Mr. Pullman.
Thank you, Alderman. So Alderman, before you take off, and does the committee have any questions for either? Well, I'm going to first start with this. Does the committee have any questions for Alderman Sigcho Lopez at this time? So seeing none, one of the things, and I appreciate your comments, Alderman, one of the things that struck me earlier today was Commissioner Hughes had mentioned that we've got to get the community excited about landmark districts. And that's wonderful. I think that's a really telling comment. That being said, you need to do it early on. You need to do it early while the people who have been there for a while get excited about preserving what they have. Unfortunately, in Pilsen, as Commissioner Cox has already indicated, over 90 demolition pieces have been filed and completed in this really vulnerable neighborhood. And so now, as the community is already changing, and I've heard from many of my friends who used to live in Pilsen, their kids don't go to the local schools anymore because they've all moved away because of the amount of development that's been occurring. So, you're in a tough situation, and I appreciate that. There is also a process that I think that needs to be addressed that I think you're trying very hard to manage, and it's a difficult thing for you to do, and I do appreciate that. The one thing that I will say, though, is that we can start to look at the biggest situation, and I've mentioned this to you before, about the financial burden that it puts on the residents in this community. And Commissioner Cox had already identified that this would be, they're proposing, the city is proposing to provide a grant program for homeowners to be able to rehabilitate their homes. And this is the first time that it's been done in any landmark district throughout the city of Chicago. So, you know, that message needs to get out to the existing homeowners. I mean, we heard from a woman today who wants to demolish her building because she can't afford to pay for it. And what she mentioned was, had she known this was available, she would have reconsidered what she was going to do. So I'm gonna, you know, leave you with that. I appreciate your comments. I appreciate the difficulty that you have in trying to accomplish what needs to be accomplished. So we'll continue to discuss that. Does the committee have any other questions of the alderman? If not, I'm going to ask the committee if they have any questions of the applicant at this time regarding his proposal.
This is Commissioner.
Hughes, go ahead.
Yes, thank you. My only comment to the alderman was kind of echoing what you were saying. Really want to thank him for getting involved with the importance of preserving his community and kind of having a point of view on it. There's a lot to unpack with this individual case. So my comments about this case is not particularly to the alderman. I guess it's more for discussion. I know he has to get off, but I did want to thank him.
Thank you.
Thank you.
All right. Does the committee have any questions for the applicant at this time? None.
Are you able to see us raising our hands?
Oh, I'm sorry. Actually, yes. Commissioner Hughes, go ahead, please.
Okay, no worries.
I'm just blind.
Okay, so can you guys hear me?
Yes.
Okay, so I also wanted to thank the owner for all the time and effort that they've put into their proposal. And I wanted to first start by educating all of us a little bit on the definition of a district. I guess I want to call on Deanna to explain it a little bit more, that a district doesn't necessarily mean a particular boundary of a site. It also could be other surrounding properties that's deemed a part of that district. Can you explain that further, Deanna? Am I saying that correctly?
So yes, Commissioner. So the district is a boundary that we draw, but it involves all the properties within it. And as you know, as you heard, the commission did recommend a particular boundary. It was submitted to City Council last May 2019. And it is in front of it's being held at committee at this point. So the property within, various properties within the district, obviously some are historic, some are very early construction, some are more later additions, later new construction, vacant lots. So there is a range of properties and obviously a lot of changes that occurred over time. And part of this district designation, there was also an understanding of various periods of development and influences by various, community members and changes in such as murals and other kinds of changes that have occurred that are all recognized as part of this designation. And also just—
And it sounded like this property was originally in the boundary that was presented. And then I'm not sure if it changed over time, or that part of the presentation was a little bit confusing for me.
Of course, I can address that. So the first map that was shown was a larger district boundary. If you remember, it had 18th Street corridor and residential properties south of that. That is the boundary that the commission recommended to city council. The alternative boundary that was shown subsequent to that is a smaller boundary, and that is a result of aldermen wishing to consider alternatives to also talk with his community and decide whether he would be proposing an alternative to the boundary that the commission has provided.
Okay, thank you so much for clarifying. So I guess with that being said, I kind of wanted to address a little bit on the design side of what was presented to us. Our comments, a lot of us have architecture backgrounds on the commission, on this committee. So we are not here to kind of impose our own design ideas on these cases that come forward. I really want to emphasize that. But we do use our expertise to comment on what is presented to us. And with this case, I do want to address that something that was a little concerning for me was with this property, the one elevation that matters the most is the front-facing elevation. And less than 50% of that was preserved in the design that was presented to that today. So that was a little bit of a concern. And the reason I posed the question earlier to Emily about how are we working through these types of properties that have the really large front yards is because the commission is not closed to additions on these types of properties, but we do need to figure out how to move forward and kind of create some give on both sides, because I believe that additions should be allowed. But I also believe that deterring and distracting so much away from the front facade is not something that I would support. So if the owner would like to comment on, again, just kind of remind me of how they were preserving that front facade, if you can bring that image up again for us all to see.
Yeah, maybe an elevation or rendering. The comment about 50% of the facade, I don't believe that we're blocking. I think we're actually keeping 100% of the facade still visible. There is an existing addition, a front porch.
Yes.
It's about 10, maybe 8 feet deep, that was added at some point that blocks the original.
The porch is existing today?
Yes, ma'am. Yes.
Okay.
And we're proposing a Gabion landscape wall that would provide that unit a private patio. And the reason why we could just as easily not do the Gabion wall, but we need to find a way to get stairs to the units. And so the thought was that because so many of these homes at one point were lifted and put on a pedestal, why not sort of recreate that pedestal, if you will, through the use of a landscape feature. That was the design guide, or the design thought behind that. It wasn't to obscure, it was actually sort of to pay homage to sort of the historic nature of what happened after the city was raised.
Yes. And did you consider when designing the addition to maybe do a more complementary design?
What would you describe as complementary? I mean, I think that comes down to my point about the choice of a hat. The neighbors have a complementary, if you will, design, but I personally think that's aesthetically unpleasing, right? I think that what we're going to end up getting into is just this argument over who thinks what looks better. And I don't think that's an appropriate kind of argument to have. That's kind of the point of my brain is to everybody.
Mr. Putnam, yeah. Mr. Putnam, I am agreeing with you on that item. You know, I don't want this discussion to get into what people's aesthetics are. You know, everybody has their own opinions of different things.
Right.
So
I mean, I'm happy to discuss massing and all of those things. And we sat down, Deanna and I sat down and tried to work through a sightline rule. We're at the back of the lot. We have an empty lot next to us. And so that all is sightline for code, for law. And, you know, that's when I brought Jonathan in, and he sort of said that we sat down and drew additions over and over and over, and just kind of realized that if we follow the rules as there are now, no addition, you know, that for other districts, no addition, you know, and setting it back further materially changes nothing. The elevation is still the same. But we lose maybe a bedroom, right? I mean, and we can't do an addition in the rear. There's no rear, it's an alley. So I don't know how to deal with this notion of setback, sightline, destroying, adding, what's, you know, it's a quagmire, clearly.
Commissioner Osmond.
Yeah, and I want to go along with my fellow commissioner where, you know, I'm concerned that we're getting to a point where, you know, we're letting the perfect get in the way of the good. That, you know, there is we have so much to gain by having the residents buy into this area as being a landmark district, but that landmark district that looks like it's got handcuffs on is going to be hard for the residents to buy into. And we still don't have a decision on this area. It's still got to go to city council. I think that there should be concern on our part that we find a way for owners to work within design guidelines that we can give that are, you know, would allow them to add to this area, so that we're not seeing every meeting. I'm a new commissioner, but it seems like every meeting we're dealing with another tear down in Pilsen, and we're putting it off until waiting for the landmark district. Well, in some point, we've got to show some sort of flexibility in working with the neighborhood so that they can afford to keep their homes and invest in their homes. So again, I don't want to get into a design aesthetic. I question that there might be too much massing on it in terms of proportion to the size of the cottage. That would be my opinion. But I just think that we've got to, the big picture is Pilsen needs to be preserved, and we've got to find a way to work with the residents and the aldermen to have that as the bigger picture.
Thank you, Commissioner Osmond. Commissioner Jakiewicz.
Yes, I just want to, I'm kind of following a lot of the comments that are being made. I think that, you know, this is one of those unique rear lot cottages in the proposed district, and which has a lot of unknowns and has been a little bit nebulous. And I understand that there's a lot of concern about the demolitions in the community, and I appreciate very much that this is not a demolition. So definitely want to commend the applicant on that. And also, I appreciate that the design keeps the historic facade intact. You know, I dislike very much a lot of the cottages that have the stairs just put in front without any care at all. So I appreciate some thought with that. And I understand the limitations of the addition in the back of the lot and on a very small footprint. I see that also that there's been a lot of care with trying to frame the historic facade and making it sort of a dominant facade. And I guess I see that this is a design that celebrates the differentiation, which I think is okay. And, you know, between the new and the historic, and while it's a bold move, I think there's certain care that's interesting and exciting for the district. And so that's my comments. Thanks.
Thank you.
Thank you. This is a really difficult situation, folks. I think, you know, one of the things you struggle with, well, the things I struggle with, frankly, is the staff recommendation would be fitting for a landmark district that has already been established. This district has not been established yet, and still will go through some scrutiny, and it puts us as this committee in a very difficult position, which you know, I think Commissioner Osmond kind of pointed out, and I think there is a need, I think, to work with the community and work with staff also to figure this out. I think if the district is established, then the guidelines go through and we could start looking at those guidelines in a much more careful way. But at this time, you know, those guidelines that are applicable is a little bit nebulous. I have a recommendation that I'd like to put as a motion, that given the challenges of the site with the structure located at the rear of the lot, recognizing the difficulties in expanding the property without substantially impacting the roof or the front facade of the building, I propose that the committee consider the building non-contributing for the purposes of allowing the construction of this two-story addition. I'd recommend that pending the designation of the district, and as part of preparing district guidelines for Pilsen, the commission should look at the remaining properties where the primary buildings are located at the rear of the lots and consider how to provide flexibility for expansion of those properties as well. And we've seen in other districts that with properties located at the rear, the owners have constructed new buildings right in front, obscuring the visibility of the existing cottage completely, but they're on the street wall and they can do a very contemporary building. So we've seen that before, and you know, perhaps moving forward, I think that the staff could, you know, if we could have more examples of that, that would be great. And again, as we've not had the ability to consider wider district guidelines for the project in front of us today, I'd like to move that we provide this consideration and approve the size, location, and form of the proposed addition. I would, however, welcome the committee's discussion regarding the design of the project in regards to its overall compatibility with the proposed district. So if there are any specific things that I think we could help the homeowner and to address, that I think that would be advantageous. So my motion on the table now is to not recommend the staff recommendations, but recommend this particular project or this property as non-contributing, and therefore he could move forward. I will say, Mr. Putnam, that, you know, as a landscape architect, I've done plenty of gabion walls in my lifetime. They're beautiful. I really like them, but I will tell you that 95, almost 100% of the time, they become rat havens. The rats just love this material.
Well, you know, this house actually currently is a rat haven downstairs, so.
So it's that
I
is
mean,
one of the things that
we're definitely open to finding other ways to blend that stair in. It just, we're trying to think about how to do that without building a larger stair or building something that's not maybe within character.
Yeah, so I mean, if that's something that you could consider and maybe, you know, come back to the committee with or work with staff, I would recommend that. I just,
yes.
You know, if you love your neighbors, if you like your neighbors, you may not want to do that.
Right.
So,
No, we absolutely do. So.
yeah. So, any other comments?
Go
ahead.
Hi, my hand has been up for a while.
Yeah, sorry.
If this becomes non-contributing, then the owner can demolish. Is that correct?
Technically, yes.
Well, can I also ask a question about that? Being non-contributing, would we be forced to follow strict zoning guidelines then, which would also kill us? Like, we're in a weird catch-22 here. So, I mean,
we can't affect.
No, I understand that, but if we're many times you've made recommendations for projects going forward that you know, the sort of help the zoning department say, you know, this is a good idea to do this, even though it doesn't. But if we're not contributing, they're going to say you're not contributing, put parking there, right? They may force us to come back to you and ask for a demolition permit. Which I don't want to do. That's not what we're after.
I don't know the answer to that question. Deanna, maybe?
So commissioners, as you know, in the landmarks ordinance, there are certain provisions that the committee could request as relief, but that relates to the side yards, front side yards, side yards. So I think that there are other issues that maybe the owner may be referring to that are beyond what the commission can influence or request relief on. But that is also something that, you know, should be considered and discussed with the zoning department and the alderman. I don't know what all the issues there might be, so I really couldn't comment on everything that may need to be required for the project.
I do know that sorry, go ahead.
This is Commissioner Hughes. I would like to put a different proposal forward. I don't think that we should make this non-contributing, considering that there are 13 other homes in the district that we would be setting a precedent for, and they would be able to come forward and say they are non-contributing as well. However, I do believe that we should keep it contributing, and we should motion to accept with conditions his proposal for the addition. And obviously that would set forward a precedent of or a case of viewing each of the other 13 homes. If they ever want to do modifications to their property, we would view those on a case-by-case basis.
Right. So, yeah, I mean, the thought that I had was the other 13, I see where you're going with that, Commissioner Hughes, in terms of setting a precedent. I also believe that we could also do that within setting the guidelines once it becomes a district. So, you know, I'm saying that this particular property would not be contributing, but the other 13 would, or could be.
It doesn't set a good example though,
yeah,
for the other 13. So,
as much as I would love that, I also have to agree with her. I think the rules need to be fair for everybody.
Say again.
I'm sorry. As much as I'd love to just accept that we would be non-contributing, I have to agree that it's not fair for the other homeowners, which is not.
So would you be okay with Commissioner Hughes' motion, which would be to put some how did you call that?
Restrictions, recommendations. Yeah. I mean, if it involves not doing a gabion wall, I'm all in favor of it. or finding a way to redesign that. I do fear, you know, bulking and massing and all of that stuff. I think that we're respecting the zoning allotment there in terms of what we're trying to achieve. We're trying to achieve, you know, a reasonable, the bedrooms in this home are not, you know, you can't put maybe you can put a twin in here. I don't know. So we do need additional space, and that's a fact. And so I'm a little concerned that maybe we'll get pressed on the bulk issue, but I don't know how to solve that. And I actually think it's a beautiful design. So, and the bulking is nice. I don't, you know, but yes, I think that is the only path forward.
Well, okay, why don't we do this? We have a long afternoon. I'm going to withdraw my motion. Commissioner Hughes, you're putting in a motion?
Yes, I am. Sorry, I was on mute. Do you need me to restate it?
I do, please.
Okay, sorry. I am motioning for us to keep this property contributing and to accept the owner's recommendation with restrictions. And we can discuss further with staff what those restrictions would be. And then obviously that sets forth the case of becoming a precedent for the other 13 properties in the future.
Okay. Is there a second to this?
I second that motion.
Second by Commissioner Osman. Let me do the roll call. Commissioner Jakivich,
Aye.
Commissioner Osman, Commissioner Osman,
Aye.
Commissioner Hughes,
Aye.
and I am voting aye as well. So that that motion carries unanimously. Good luck, Mr. Putnam.
Thank you.
It's been a wonderful conversation, and we wish you the best.
Thank you all.
Thank you. All right. Gosh, I'm all over the place here. All right, let's go back to item number 1, which is 900 West Fulton Market. This is in the Fulton Randolph Market District. Proposed
Excuse me,
rehabilitation.
sorry, Commissioner. Can we bring Commissioner Aguirre back if we haven't already?
Oh, yes, please. Sorry about that. Didn't mean to leave you out in the alley too long.
It's okay. It's okay.
All right. This is the 900 West Fulton Market in the Fulton Randolph Market District. Proposed rehabilitation of a 4-story building at 900 West Fulton Market, including new rooftop addition, demolition of 1- and 2-story building, and construction of a new 9-story building at 906 West Fulton Market, and partial demolition of a 2-story building at 910. With rehabilitation of the front facade and construction of a new rooftop addition. That's a lot. So Larry, if you could show us what's going on with this.
It just gets more complicated. So bear with me. The Fulton Market, Fulton Randolph Market District was designated in 2015 to preserve historic buildings associated with early wholesale food marketing and distribution. The subject property is located at the northwest corner of Fulton Market in Peoria and contains 3 buildings, 2 of which were recommended as contributing in the Fulton Randolph Market Designation Report. This proposal is also concurrently under review as a planned development. Because this proposal also includes significant demolition components, the project is also subject to the relevant provisions of the municipal code governing review of permits for the demolition of 40% or more of any building or structure designated as a Chicago landmark or located in any district designated as a Chicago landmark. And we'll talk more about that momentarily. Let's go to the next slide. So these are some exhibits just to orient you a little bit to the site. The overall district is shown on the upper left, and the star indicates the location of the site. To the right is a zoom in on that same map, showing that the contributing buildings are proposed to be the 900 and 910, and that 906 is identified as non-contributing. And then to the bottom, there's a couple of photographs, one from the corner and one straight ahead, just to orient you a little bit further. Let's go to the next slide. So as you mentioned, the project includes facade restoration and rooftop additions for 900 West Fulton Market and 910 West Fulton Market, both of which were preliminarily identified as contributing. A proposed new 9-story infill construction is intended to replace 906 Fulton Market, the building in the middle. Although these 3 buildings were constructed separately, they have been used as a single complex since at least 1916. The proposal also intends to use these buildings together while maintaining their individual characteristics. In order to accomplish this, this project will require a foundation in common for the entire site, which will result in partial demolition and replacement of the structural systems of the historic building. A similar proposal was approved by the Commission at 1100 West Fulton Market, which maintain a portion of the historic building and then connected to adjacent new construction. So let's go to the next slide here. We got a lot of slides. So what we want to talk about first is the determination of whether 906 Fulton Market is contributing or non-contributing. And as you know, the report provides a preliminary recommendation, but when someone actually proposes demolition, then staff takes a closer look at the individual criteria that allows us to determine if a building is contributing or non-contributing. I'm not going to go into enormous detail for all this criteria, although I do want to note that your designation report does have all that information if you would like to take a closer look. So criteria 1 and 2 relate to whether the property exhibits the general historic and architectural features as described in the designation ordinance. And those features are generally corbelled brick, cast iron details, elaborate parapets, things along that nature. It's our recommendation that this building really doesn't exhibit those significant criteria as identified in that ordinance. It's fairly utilitarian building. It actually consists of two different buildings, in my opinion. The 2-story building, which you can see in this photo, and then kind of a 1-story building that was wrapped around that to create these loading docks along Fulton Market. Let's go to some more of the criteria on the next slide. So criteria 3, 4, and 5 relate to the general characteristics of buildings within the district. And this building does respect the general site characteristics. It does maintain the street wall, and it is consistent with the general scale associated with the district, as well as the materials utilized in the district. However, the building does exhibit a number of alterations, including a loss of height, whether it's 1 floor or 2, that you can see in the photo of that 2-story building. At some point, it lost a floor, and you can still see the different brick that was used to repair that. I also want to mention that although we do have some information about the building, we were not able to identify the original building permit, so we don't really know who designed it or when precisely it was constructed. We're estimating that it was built about 1906, but it's difficult to say for sure. So we are recommending that the commission find this as non-contributing, which would allow it to be demolished and replaced with the proposed infill construction. Let's go to the next slide. So many slides. So first, I'd like to talk about 900 West Fulton Market, which is that corner building. The applicant proposes to restore all window openings along Fulton Market and Peoria, installing compatible new double hung windows. The non-original storefront infill will be removed and a new compatible storefront will be inserted. These will extend up to the historic cast iron lintels, which will remain on the front elevation. Additional storefronts are proposed for the east elevation, and insertion of new storefronts is also supported by the Fulton Randolph Market design guidelines, which I think I hopefully included in your packet. The work also includes substantial masonry repair and restoration, including reconstruction of the parapets, which have begun to bow and lean. The entire building will be tuck pointed and damaged brick shall be replaced as necessary. Let's go to the next slide. So these are the demo elevations. So portions of the west elevation are proposed to be removed, allowing the building to be connected to the proposed new structure at 906 Fulton Market. According to the applicant, total amount of demolition results in about 22.9% the significant historical or architectural features. That is below the 40% threshold that would require council approval, and we are recommending that amount of demolition be approved. We are recommending that a report by a licensed structural engineer addressing how the building should be protected during demolition and construction be submitted to historic preservation staff as a part of the permit plans, and that the recommended measures, sequencing, and protections shall be incorporated into the structural and architectural drawings. Let's go to the next slide. The applicants are proposing to construct a 2-story rooftop addition on 900 Fulton Market. The proposed addition is set back 20 feet from Fulton Market and 15 from Peoria, which is in keeping with the recommended setbacks in the design guidelines for rooftop additions of buildings 4 stories or greater. The 2-story addition is 22 feet in height, which is compatible with the floor heights of the historic building. The design of the addition utilizes a glass and metal curtain wall with dark colored mullions. The commission has previously approved of new rooftop additions with modern simplified details, which can be clearly differentiated from the historic structure. Okay, moving on to the next. So this is the two-story building at 910 West Fulton Market. The primary elevation along Fulton Market has been substantially altered, including storefront infill and reduction in the size of the second floor windows. The applicant proposes to install a new compatible storefront system and restore the original window openings at the second floor with new compatible double hung windows. The front facade and parapet will be repaired as needed. However, there is substantial amounts of demolition proposed for this property. And we'll look at that a little bit more on the next slide. So according to the engineer's report, which was included in your packet, a temporary shoring system in the basement is not adequately engineered to support the weight of the building. Cracks in the first floor concrete slab and corroded rebar are visible, and the parapets are tilting outward. The report concludes that 910 West Fulton Market, except for the front facade, is not salvageable and would require replacement. The dilapidated state of the building indicates that it may not survive substantial intervention. Staff did tour the site with the applicant and agrees that the condition is fairly poor. Let's go to the next slide. We'll talk a little bit more about this. So the applicant is proposing to retain the front facade and 7 feet of the east facade, which you see in these graphics, and those areas will be braced and placed and retained. Due to the structural condition of the building, the remainder of the structure is proposed to be demolished and replaced with new structure. As I mentioned, if removal equals 40% or more of the significant features, it requires approval from City Council. The applicant has provided some graphics that indicate what they believe are the portions of visible facade that must be removed. And they came up with a calculation that equals about 36.1%. Staff is a little bit concerned about this calculation because it depends on particular vantage points to determine what the maximum amount of removal is. So we recommended that they expand their calculations to include that entire east elevation. And if they did that, it would equal about 55% removal. So we are recommending that if that is the case, then this would also be approved by City Council along with that middle building. Again, we're recommending that a report by a licensed structural engineer address how the remaining portion of the building would be braced and protected, and that would be submitted to historic preservation staff as a part of the permit plans. Let's go to the next one, yet more exhibits. The applicants proposed to construct a 2-story addition on the 2-story building at 910 Fulton Market. The design guidelines limit rooftop additions to 1 story for buildings which are 1 to 3 stories in height. In order to address this, the applicants have set back the 1-story portion of the building 15 feet from the front property line, and they've set back a proposed second floor 32 feet from that front property line, which creates this kind of stepped condition that you see illustrated on the graphic to the left. Additionally, the height of the second floor is significantly less than the established historic floor heights, and the intent was to minimize the visibility of that second floor while providing enough square footage to meet the program needs of the development. The applicants did provide significant amounts of perspective renderings from a number of vantage points to illustrate that the proposal will not result in significantly more visibility than the 1-story addition recommended by the guidelines. So staff is recommending that the additional floor is adequately offset by that increased setback and that it may be approved as proposed. The design of the rooftop addition incorporates brick cladding and a simplified reference to the historic parapet details. Staff recommends that the proposed setback and massing are compatible with the intent of the design guidelines, which is to allow compatible rooftop additions which do not damage or obscure the historic character of the building. Let's go to the next one. So I want to talk a bit about the proposed 9-story infill construction at the location of 906 Fulton Market. The first 7 stories of the building are about 90 feet 10 inches in height, and that's compatible with the tallest contributing building in the district at 900 West Lake. The two top floors are set back 20 feet in order to decrease the visible mass at the front property line. The height of the top 2 stories, 22 feet, brings the total height to 114 feet. Rooftop mechanicals atop the building increase that height to approximately 123 feet. In June of 2019, the PRC approved a new construction project at 1041, 1043 West Fulton Market. In that case, the 8-story masonry base of the building at 1043 was almost identical to the proposed height of these lower 7 floors, 90 feet, 10 inches. A glass tower was set back 20 feet from Fulton Market for a maximum height of 138 feet. In that case, the proposal covered an entire block within the district and was not immediately adjacent to any historic structures. In this case, the proposal incorporates 2 historic structures, which are significantly smaller in scale. The proposal is also adjacent to other historic buildings on the block. The design of the proposed building utilizes masonry piers and spandrels with punched openings and paired double hung windows on the upper floors. A corbelled cornice terminates the 7-story portion of the building. The proposal incorporates a light reddish brown face brick. The setback portion of the building utilizes this same brick and has a more contemporary expression with larger windows and metal spandrel panels. Staff recommends that the proposed infill construction is compatible with the historic characteristics of the district and that it be approved as submitted. Staff recommends the proposed window and storefront details be included in the permit plans and that all glass be clear vision and any metal cladding to have a dark non-reflective finish, subject to staff review and approval of a material sample prior to order and installation. So the next few slides are some of the perspectives that the applicants have provided to orient you a little more strongly to the building and to its context in the district as a whole. And here you can see the view of the project looking looking east towards the loop. Let's go to the next one. Kind of already seen this one again, but I've expanded a little bit to show some of the adjacent buildings. And then the last one is a close-up on the treatment of the storefronts along Fulton Market and Peoria. So I guess we go to the recommendation sheet, which is really tiny and hard to read, but pretty much I touched on all of these in my presentation. We're recommending that 906 be determined to be non-contributing and that the demolition be approved, both for this building and the partial demolitions for the other buildings. And second, we're recommending that the new construction be approved subject to the conditions that I noted. That's it for me. If you have questions, I do want to mention that the applicants are also on the call and can address your questions as well.
Thank you, Larry. That's a lot to take in.
Yes.
But it's really cool. Does the committee have any questions for Larry at this time? Commissioner Osman? You have to unmute. There you go.
It's the Google building.
I'm sorry, say again?
How tall is the cold storage building, the Google building?
So that is significantly taller. However, it is considered a non-contributing building, so we really don't take it into account when evaluating new construction in the district. I don't recall offhand how tall it is, but it's certainly taller than this proposed building.
Okay.
Anybody else? Go ahead.
Thank you. So can I clarify some of the items of the revised proposal? Was primarily integrating brick material in the addition upper levels, correct? I'm looking at the revised proposal and the from April 15th. In comparison.
Oh, you're looking at the
I'm looking at the
comparison.
report.
Yeah, maybe we can go to back a couple of slides and look at that rendering. You know what? How about 2 slides forward? Oh, that one, perfect. Okay, so the current proposal that you're looking at here is the final submittal. The previous one that I think was included in your packet, and I don't think anyone else can see, was a slightly different proposal, which had a slightly different treatment of the brick and of the upper portion of the building. Staff had some concerns that the building should read as a more of an individual building rather than as a building that's had an addition put onto it. And then there was some concern about breaking up the massing of that to be a little more compatible with the historic character of the district. Is that what you're focusing on?
Yeah, correct. I think there was, yeah, I just wanted a clarification on that because it significantly increased the amount of brick material, which contributes to a much more integrated aesthetic integration of the addition with the existing building that it's in the foreground. So I just wanted, I wanted to acknowledge that there was already a significant revision of this.
I want to say that we've worked on this project with the applicants for about 6 months, and they've done an extraordinary job of incorporating our comments into the submittal.
Yeah, I wanted to bring attention to that effort. Thank you.
Great. If nobody else has any questions of Larry at this time, the applicant is here. Is that what you said?
Yes.
Okay. I'd like to hear from them. If you folks could. Hi, Sophie.
Hey, how are you? I don't know.
Very good, thanks.
Great.
If you could, do you have any comments on this?
First off, Larry and Deanna, thank you guys very much. I think, bringing up the comments about the addition to that 7-story building and the change that we were just discussing at our initial submission. I'm looking at this now and thinking how happy I am that we ended up making this change. And I think it really is a testament to the teamwork that we have with Larry and with Deanna and Landmark staff. So thank you very much. We're really excited about this project. Our office is just down the street at Fulton and Carpenter, though we're not there right now and we miss it very much. This is our neighborhood. We're really excited to work on. We do a birdhouse in Fulton Market if we could. So thank you guys for your time. And if you have any architectural questions, I'm happy to answer them.
We do. Commissioner Hughes.
Hi, actually, it's not a question, more so of a comment. I just want to commend you all for your committed effort and dedication behind this and really integrating the design and bringing it to be kind of fit into this context seamlessly. I just want to draw attention to that and commend you guys for your effort.
Thank you.
I would second that as well. I think it's a wonderful project. Anybody else have any questions for?
Commissioner Osmond, and I would just third that then, Ernie, is a resident of the West Loop. I've seen a lot of things I don't like getting built, and I'm very excited to see this come in into the neighborhood.
Yeah.
Thank you so much.
Commissioner Aguirre? Oh, okay. You're just waving.
I'm celebrating such an elegant proposal.
Wow. Okay. Well, hey, if there are no more comments, I'd like to call for a motion to approve the staff recommendation for this project. Is there a motion on?
So moved.
Commissioner Aguirre, and second by
Commissioner Hughes. Yes.
Let's do the roll call. Commissioner Osmond.
I approve.
Commissioner Jakiewicz.
I approve.
Commissioner Hughes.
Yes.
Commissioner Gary.
Yes.
And I am also in favor. That the motion carries unanimously. Great job, Sophie. Good luck.
Thanks.
Let's get this thing built.
We'll do our best.
All right.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you. All right. The next item is the property located at 8 South Michigan. This is a historic Michigan Boulevard district. Proposed replacement of 319 decorative cast iron spandrel panels with new fiber reinforced polymer spandrel panels to match the historic. And Larry, I think you have this one too.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. You're going to get very sick of my voice because I have 3 more presentations to go.
We won't. You're moving pretty well.
Thank you. So Willoughby Tower is a 36-story Gothic-inspired skyscraper, which was designed by the architect Samuel Crowan and constructed in 1929. It was designated a part of the historic Michigan Boulevard District in 2002. The applicants contacted historic preservation staff in November of 2019 to discuss repairs and stabilization of failing cast iron panels. This was in response to, I believe, a piece of the cast iron that may have fallen from the building that fall. Let's move on to the next. Cast iron spandrel panels are found on the north or Madison elevation, the east Michigan Avenue elevation, as well as the west elevation of the tower portion. There are various sizes and configurations of these panels up and down the building. The owner of the property, Mark Realty, contracted with KGH to provide a survey and analysis of the existing conditions and to develop a plan of repair. KGH reviewed the condition of all 319 cast iron spandrel panels from suspended scaffolding between October and December. Their investigation also included 2 inspection openings. Inspection revealed numerous deficiencies, some of which were deemed imminently hazardous and had to be repaired immediately. In some cases, entire panels were removed due to significant fracturing and displacement. In general, the condition of panels on all elevations was deemed to be poor due to lack of maintenance and prolonged exposure to weathering. Panels were significantly worn and corroded and had not been painted in recent years. A number of panels had previously been removed. Some had been partially cut to accommodate through-wall air conditioning units. Resulting voids were often infilled with dark brown brick. In some cases, visible structural repairs to the panels had been performed. Many panels have missing corners due to fractures within the material or corrosion related to the underlying steel angles. Much of this corrosion is due to failure of the perimeter spandrel sealant joints and the failed paint coatings. Based on their survey, KGH determined that more than 60% of the panels are not salvageable. This was primarily a visual survey, although some panels were removed for a more thorough inspection. In some cases, panels which appeared to be solid revealed fractures and hairline cracks on the back, which were not readily apparent on the front. Let's move to the next. Here we go. The process of removal irreparably damages these cast iron panels. They appear to have been installed from the interior of the building with J-hooks prior to installation of the buildings. Backup masonry was then infilled from above. They cannot be removed intact without removal of the adjacent limestone cladding or creating access through the openings in the interior walls. Attempts to remove the panels intact did result in additional fractures. So historic preservation guidelines state that when deteriorated ornamental features cannot be repaired, they may be replaced to match the old in design, color, texture, and overall visual qualities, and where possible, materials. While cast iron or even cast aluminum would be the most appropriate from a historic standpoint, the original method of attachment requires substantial removal of limestone cladding and brick backup in order to access those backside connections necessary to support the weight of any cast metal. Applicant notes that shoring of the window assemblies might also be needed to allow reinstallation of the heavy metal panels, substantially adding to the complexity of the project. Rather than wholesale removal of adjacent historic materials, the applicant proposes a lighter alternative, which could be securely installed without major reconstruction. And that alternative is fiber reinforced polymer. So let's go to the next slide. So the commission has approved of fiber reinforced polymer, or FRP, as a replacement material on various landmark projects. Most recently, FRP was permitted to replicate the missing terracotta cornice at 226 West Jackson. FRP has also been approved as a replacement for the Joliet limestone spire at the First Baptist Congregational Church. FRP molds can be taken from existing features, or a model can be built to replicate historic features, and a mold can be taken from that. The current proposal represents the first request for large-scale replacement of cast iron with FRP replications. This material is relatively lightweight compared to cast metal, but the primary advantage comes from the flexibility in the connections needed to securely attach the lighter panels to the building structure. FRP panels would minimize the impact of new connections on the existing structural frame and limit the extent of backup brick masonry repair work or resetting of limestone masonry cladding. The use of FRP also reduces the risk of future catastrophic failure due to spalling or fracturing. These cast iron spandrels begin above the 4th floor on the north elevation and the 6th floor on the east elevation, which is 45 feet and 65 feet above grade, respectively. At that height, it will be difficult to identify these as a replacement material. The applicant has created an FRP panel mock-up. The intent was actually to have this at the PRC meeting so you could take a close-up look at that, but sadly that's not going to be possible. Staff did view these mock-ups side by side with the historic cast iron panel and found the match to be very accurate. Let's go to the last slide. So FRP panels may be painted to match the color of cast iron spandrels. Just like cast iron, all panels are intended to be painted, which will further protect the material. The panels will need to be repainted periodically, but this is also true for cast iron. Because the color of the panels will greatly impact the appearance of the building, staff recommends that the historic color be investigated by a qualified expert and that the permit plans incorporate their recommendation into the color choice, subject to staff review and approval. And you can see we are recommending approval with those two conditions. That concludes my presentation. If you have questions for me, and I know that the applicants are on the call as well.
Thank you, Larry. Does the committee have any questions of Larry at this time? It's a great building. I used to have my office there, and then Millennium Park got built and rent got too high. Anyway, okay, wonderful. The applicant is here. They want to say anything?
Hi, yes, this is Mike Bonnick from Kellermeyer Gottfried Hart. I'm the architect and engineer on the project. I think Larry summarized things really well. I just want to start by saying thanks to Larry and the staff for their help and all their time along the way. Also for Ward Miller and his comments at the start of the call. Larry summarized things really well. I think the issue that I really want to hone in on is that as a professional and expert with these materials, KGH can't recommend salvaging any of the panels, not even one of them, in our opinion, based on the way that they're attached and based on the way, or the inherent brittleness of the material. We haven't been able to review the backside of all these panels, but those that we have, we're finding deficiencies that are just not detectable from the outside. And we've also worked with a couple of laboratories that try to determine other testing methods to find any panels that, or find any other testing method that doesn't require removal of the panels and that can accurately detect all the deficiencies. The problem is, most importantly, that when there is a crack in a panel, when there is a deficiency, the result is something that falls to the sidewalk. So there's really no in between, and it's usually a very, it's not detectable to find that pattern when it's actually going to happen. So there's nothing we can do ahead of time to try to identify these deficiencies and then prevent them. We settled on fiber reinforced polymer, FRP, for a lot of reasons, but the biggest reason is that the existing
cast iron panels were erected during construction before they built the brick masonry back up. And we believe even before that the limestone and windows went on. So in essence, the only way we can't remove a panel without irreparably damaging it. The bolted connections are completely concealed and there's no way to access those bolted connections to unfasten them without either taking out all of the backup brick masonry that supports the windows above, or also to take out the limestone masonry on the side to reach those bolted connections. So basically, the only way to get a panel off is to cut out the anchors, which means we can take a panel off in maybe 5 or 6 pieces. And then putting them back on, the difficulty with putting on a cast iron panel is mostly in the fact that it's really heavy. And when we're putting those panels back on, we have to do it blindly. So if we're not going to take out the limestone around it, if we're not going to take out the windows or the brick masonry behind it, which on every single panel in the building is just not feasible, we have to find a way to basically take that panel and put it on like a concealed fastener wall hanging. And with the really heavy panels, there's really just there's not a way that we can do it that's going to make me as an architect and engineer feel comfortable with a brittle material, including cast aluminum, which we'll put right in the category with cast iron. So FRP is wonderful. We did get a mock-up made, and I think the mock-up was just fantastically mimicked the detail in the original cast iron. It looked great, and we think we can ultimately find a color that's going to be suitable and period correct. And because you can't see any of the panels from within 45 to 65 feet, I don't think that it will be detectable at all.
Sounds great. Sounds really good. Does the committee have any questions for Mr. Bonnick? Commissioner Aguirre.
Sorry, I was trying to navigate between the real hand and the digital hand. I just have a comment. A common question. I really appreciate the careful study on the conditions of these panels. And I really appreciate the effort in bringing like cohesiveness to the integrity of the facade as a whole. So I really commend you for all that attention to detail. I just have a question. How many was the total number of panels that's going to be replaced? That's question one. And then just to understand scale and quantity, the other question, just out of curiosity, are there any original panels left on the facade, and or is there a strategy for their replacement? I just want to understand if it's all going to be done at once, or incrementally checking on those that are going to be eventually falling because of the conditions of the wall that you already explained.
Sure. So there are 319 panels on the facades. The vast majority of them are on the Madison Street elevation and the Michigan Street elevation. When we surveyed them, we found over 60% had either already been removed, partially removed and bricked in, partially removed and not bricked in, or otherwise stabilized with supplemental steel on the outside of the panels or underneath the panels. Of the remaining 40% that are currently intact, what we don't know is what the condition is on the backside. So as I was describing before, we took off a couple of panels that looked otherwise clean, that looked good from the outside, and we thought they'd be salvageable. And once we removed them from the backside, we reviewed and found fractures all over the place, which basically means they're not salvageable anymore. So while we found 60% of them had observable deficiencies, I believe that the actual total of unsalvageable panels is really close to 100%. Right now, ownership's plan is to begin as soon as they can. One of the reasons is we've deemed the building to be in an imminently hazardous condition. So there are sidewalk canopy protection erected currently on Michigan and Madison. And I don't believe we can remove that until we remove the panels. So right now the goal is to remove and replace all of the panels as quickly as possible.
Thank you. Commissioner Hughes.
Yes. Are you guys able to hear me?
Can't hear you. Commissioner Hughes.
I'm sorry. Are you guys able to hear me now?
Now, yep.
My apologies. First of all, I'm very happy for the direction that we have been moving in as a commission with allowing for newer innovative materials to come into play. I did have a question for the owner about all of the, 319 panels, that's a lot of material. Is there a strategy for what you guys plan to do with that material after it's removed to contribute to this eco environment that we're shooting for as a society?
I would have to refer to the owner on that one if that's possible. Currently, I'm not aware of plans. We haven't gotten that far in the plan yet. We're working with Central Building and Preservation to do the contractor to do the work. And at this point, we need to make sure that we can use the FRP before we can move forward. But if there is any, I'd imagine they're going to be recycled, if anything, for the metal. But if you want to, I think Rich Kruger from Mark Realty might be the person to ask that question of.
I was just curious. Yes, recycling is what should definitely happen. But thank you. And again, with us allowing for innovative new technology and materials, I'm very excited about this direction.
Wonderful. Any other questions, committee? Having none, I'd like to call for a motion to accept the staff recommendation for this project.
So moved.
And Commissioner Tukievich moved, and a second.
Second.
Who's that? Paula? Yep.
That's
Commissioner Aguirre. Second. Commissioner Hughes.
I accept.
Commissioner Osmond.
I agree.
Commissioner Tukievich.
I agree.
Commissioner Aguirre.
Yes.
And I am in favor as well. The motion carries unanimously. Good luck, Mr. Bonnick. Thank you very much for your work. I'm sure it's going to be fantastic. Thank you. Next project up is the property located at 2132 North Halsted in the Armitage Halsted district. This is a proposed new mixed-use 4-story masonry building with roof deck and attached rear garage with roof deck. And Larry, keep going.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I do want to mention that we got a letter of support for this project, both from the alderman and from the community group. I don't think we received those in time to go in your packet, but I believe they were posted in the commission website. So as you mentioned, this is a new mixed-use 4-story masonry building with roof deck and attached rear garage with roof deck. The Armitage Halsted Historic District was designated in 2003 and contains one of Chicago's finest intact collections of small-scale 19th century commercial architecture. Some of you commissioners may recall that the commission approved a demolition of a non-contributing building on this same site back in 2019, and this structure is the proposed replacement. I believe that was kind of a 1-story building that had been a liquor store for a long time. So let's go to the next slide. As we do for all proposed infill construction, we request that the applicant provide streetscapes and site block plans so that we can look at the proposed building and determine if it's compatible with the existing characteristics of the adjacent buildings. In this case, the building is maintaining the existing street wall, and it also has a 0 lot line condition, and this is consistent with the historic buildings as well. And also, additionally, the height is quite compatible with the other historic buildings up and down that block. We've got one more streetscape. Let's go to the next slide. And this, the applicant provided with a rendering of the proposed building just to show how it relates to the adjacent construction in regard to color, material, and overall look and feel. Let's go to the next slide. The proposed 4-story building incorporates punched window openings, a first floor storefront, and a projecting cornice at the front parapet. The floor heights and window sizes are compatible with the adjacent historic buildings, particularly the building to the north. Let's go to the next slide. Moving right along. The storefront spans the height of the first floor and utilizes transom windows with divided lights and decorative bulkhead panels. This is compatible with the adjacent historic storefronts. Applicants have also shown proposed signage on this submittal, including 3-inch and 6-inch high letters attached to the storefront windows and a non-illuminated blade sign about 2 feet in height and 4.5 feet in length. Staff recommends that the signage be approved in concept, and signage details shall be reviewed and approved with the sign permit applications. Let's move on to the side elevations. They are proposing to construct a rooftop stair enclosure to provide access to a roof deck. This enclosure is set back from the front facade 16.5 feet. It's about 8 feet in width, and it projects above the front parapet by approximately 5 feet. The stair enclosure utilizes a sloped roof to match the slope of the stairs in order to decrease its visibility. The stair enclosure will have a dark, non-reflective fiber cement cladding. The metal railing for that roof deck is set back about 5.5 feet and projects only about 6 inches above the front parapet and will not be visible from the public right-of-way. I also want to mention that what the applicants have proposed is a brick wrap around the sides of that building to screen any views there might be of the proposed concrete masonry units, which they're utilizing for the non-visible elevations. And they've also are showing face brick for the south parapet of the area of the building that contains that roof deck. The CMU is proposed to be to have an integral color to match the color of that face brick. Let's go to the next one where they provided some product information and colors and textures of what they would like to use. Obviously, this is the point in the meeting when I would pass around a material board, which sadly I can't do. So these are the proposed materials, the limestone and brick, and staff is recommending approval of these as well. Let's just go to the last slide. And this is our recommended conditions of approval, which I pretty much touched on, and they're mostly proposed anyway. And that kind of is it for this. If you guys have questions about my presentation, I'd be glad to address those. I believe the applicants are here as well.
Thanks so much, Larry. Does the committee have any questions of Larry at this time? Everything's clear, seems to be pretty good here. The applicant is here if you'd like to make a statement.
Hi, can everyone hear me?
Yes.
Oh, okay. Just wanted to thank the committee for working through this process with us. We appreciate just all the conversations. A lot of people put a lot of time into this process. So just wanted to thank everyone for their time and appreciate the help.
Thank you. Does the committee have any questions for the owner? And seeing none. Okay, well then let me call for a motion to approve the staff recommendations. Anybody want to move?
So moved.
Commissioner Jakiewicz, and a second.
Second.
Second by Osmond. Commissioner Hughes.
Yes.
Commissioner Aguirre. Commissioner Aguirre.
Yes.
Commissioner Jakiewicz. Commissioner Jakiewicz.
Yes.
Commissioner Osmond.
Yes.
And I'm in favor as well, Commissioner Wong. The motion carries unanimously. All right, good luck, Mr. McKinnon. And let's go on to the next one. We're making, the next one actually is through that we're done with. The property located at 2314 North Cambridge. This is in the Mid-North District, proposed new fourth floor addition and roof deck up top, an existing 3-story family home. There, you got this one too.
I do. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So the Mid-North Historic, oh, before I start, I do want to mention we have letters of support for this as well. I think one was included in your packet, and then one was posted earlier this week. The Mid-North Historic District was designated in 1977 as an example of a typical Chicago residential neighborhood at the end of the 19th century, containing excellent examples of building types and architectural styles that predominated when Chicago was rebuilding itself after the fire of 1871. I should mention that this is not one of those buildings. So the proposed rooftop addition is 21 feet, 3 inches in length and 25 feet in depth. It is set back from the east or the Cambridge parapet, approximately 14 feet, and from the south parapet, about 1.5 feet. The east side of the rooftop addition, on the east side of the rooftop addition, the applicant proposes to construct a roof deck. The deck is approximately 32 feet in length and 16 feet in depth. The east railing is set back 1 foot 8 inches from the east parapet and 4 feet from the north and 6 feet from the south. The height of the safety railings extends about 1.5 feet above that east parapet. So when we review rooftop additions like this, we have to determine if they will be visible from within the district. And typically we do that through a mock-up. And this came in as a permit, and staff was concerned that this would in fact be visible from within the district. It does have kind of a shed roof configuration. The lowest point of that roof is about 8 feet on the south end and slopes up to about 11 feet 4 inches on the north. The roof that slopes contains 5 skylights, and the base of the structure is fiber cement panel with stucco texture, and the walls utilize aluminum mullions and fiber cement trim. Let's go to look at one more elevation just for the heck of it. And then let's go to the next slide. And here are some section details showing how that building relates to the height of the roof and to the condition at the front of the property line. How about one more slide? So we did request that the applicant create a mock-up of the proposed rooftop addition, which they did. And we went out there to evaluate the visibility. And there was in fact more than minimal visibility, both from the south, directly across the street. Let's go to the next slide. And from vantage point slightly to the north, you can still see the top point of that structure poking up above that parapet. I do want to mention that after we reviewed this mock-up, the design of that rooftop addition was modified somewhat to decrease in height a little bit more than 1 foot. So what you're looking at in these mock-ups would actually be a little less visible based on the revised design. So we are recommending approval of this because even though it is somewhat visible, we feel that it does not adversely impact the district. And that's really what we're looking at when we evaluate changes to non-contributing buildings. That is it for my presentation. I believe the applicants are on the call as well if you have questions for them.
Thank you, Larry. Does the committee have any questions of Larry at this time regarding this project? The applicant, if you'd like to say something. Mr. Andrew?
Oh, yes. No, I really don't have anything to add to the presentation. Just thanks to Larry for reviewing this, and we're excited to move forward with the project.
Okay, great. Does the committee have any questions for the owner? If not, I'd like to call for, yes, no? If not, I'd like to call for a motion to approve the staff recommendation.
I move to approve the staff recommendation, Commissioner Osmann.
And a second?
Second.
Commissioner Gary with a second? Or is that Commissioner Hughes? I'm sorry. Commissioner Gary. Okay, Commissioner Jakivich,
I approve.
Commissioner Hughes,
I approve.
Commissioner Osmann. Commissioner Osmann,
I approve.
Commissioner Gary.
Yes.
We are unanimous with this. Good luck, Mr. Andrew, and we'll get this thing going too. Thanks so much. All right. Last project is the property located at 560 West Fullerton in the Mid-North District. This is a proposed insertion of a new garage into a street-facing elevation and new curb cut. And Emily, you're taking us home here.
Thank you, Commissioner. So this property might look a little familiar to you. It's located at the corner of Geneva Terrace and Fullerton Avenue in the Mid-North District. And in July of last year, the committee approved extensive masonry replacement for the row house. A permit has been issued for that work, but construction hasn't begun. Before proceeding with the previously approved work, the owner has submitted pre-permit plans to insert a garage door on the Geneva Terrace elevation and construct a new curb cut. So as you can see, 560 West Fullerton is the westernmost of 5 row houses along Fullerton, and the subject lot and building doesn't have alley access. It's approximately 20 feet by 63 feet corner lot. It has no rear or side yards, and it's blocked in by buildings on both sides. This is not a unique condition within the Mid-North District. There are at least 5 other similar conditions where buildings do not have access to an alley. So the applicant is proposing to insert an approximately 7-foot tall by 10-foot wide garage door into the first floor of the west elevation of the existing row house. While not the front facade, the west elevation is still a primary elevation facing Geneva Terrace with no side yard setback. This portion of the first floor currently houses a kitchen, bathroom, and interior stair. The applicant proposes to demolish the interior partitions and create a new 1-car garage space. So similar to the front facade, the Geneva Terrace elevation is clad with face brick and features the same decorative cornice and articulated roofline. Based on research, staff has determined that even though changes to the building have occurred over the years, no evidence exists that a garage door opening ever existed on this elevation. Sanborn maps of the property show that there was originally a projecting bay similar to the bay on the adjacent building. Physical evidence on the building supports this finding. The missing limestone banding above the existing first floor door opening indicates the location where the projecting base started, and the scarring in the historic cornice is where the 2-story bay ended. Below the existing first floor door opening and under the vaulted sidewalk, evidence of a space used for storage of coal and fuel that was accessed through the basement was uncovered. So in order to facilitate the use of the proposed garage, the applicant is proposing to add a new 25-foot 4-inch curb cut on Geneva Terrace. The proposed drive would be approximately 8.5 inches below the existing sidewalk at the lowest point and 3 inches below the sidewalk at its highest point. The applicant proposes to slope the existing sidewalk on both sides to accommodate the new depressed drive. In 1992, the commission adopted a curb cut guideline as part of the guidelines for alterations to historic buildings and new construction. It generally states that new curb cuts are not acceptable for parking in the front of a property or for driveways leading to the side or rear yard, where curb cuts are not characteristic of the original development. The proposal to insert the garage door opening within the facade and construct a wide curb cut would require the removal of historic material, create an opening that is not consistent with historic conditions, is not characteristic of the original development, and would be an adverse effect on the significant features of the building and the Mid-North District. Furthermore, this approval could be used as a precedent for the many other similarly sited buildings in the Mid-North and adjacent Arlington-Deming district. The applicant has provided a number of examples of projects they deem similar to their proposal throughout the city. Staff reviewed these examples and found that the garages in question are either not located on landmark properties such as 2401 Jansen, and some predate the designation of the Mid-North District, as is 2454 North Geneva. Okay. One other example provided by the applicant, one sec. One other example provided by the applicant is not located in the Mid-North District, but is part of the 7 houses on Lakeshore Drive District. This particular property has 3 street-facing elevations, and a garage was constructed on the rear least significant elevation, given that it was on the rear elevation of the residence and clearly matched the surrounding context. So staff recommends that the examples given are either not similar to the circumstances at the subject property or are not applicable as they're not subject to commission review. So a letter of opposition from Alderman Smith has been submitted. It's included in the letters that were uploaded to the website. And staff recommends that the committee find that the proposed project to insert a garage door into a street-facing elevation and new curb cut does not meet the criteria set forth in the commission's rules and regulations, the commission's guidelines for alterations to historic buildings and new construction, and standards 2, 3, and 9 of the U.S. Secretary of the Interior Standards for Rehabilitation. And therefore, the project would have an adverse effect on the significant historical and architectural features of the landmark property and district. Staff further recommends that the committee advise the applicant that should historic preservation staff receive a permit application for the project as currently proposed, staff shall issue a preliminary disapproval of the application. A preliminary disapproval would trigger an informal conference, and if that still doesn't reach an accord, a public hearing on the permit application would be scheduled in accordance with the provisions of the landmarks ordinance. So that's all for me. I know the owner is here as well.
Thank you, Emily. Does the committee have any questions for Emily at this time about this project? Commissioner Hughes.
Yes, thank you. Emily, was there any discussion on, first of all, does the owner have current parking right now? And was there any discussion on the staff side of other ways of resolving this issue?
So it's a tough situation. It has quite a long front yard, but that's not allowed to have parking in it. So it's just street parking around there, generally speaking. You know, it's tough having 2 primary facades. There isn't really any way that we could see that adding a garage would work without removal of the material and, you know, non-consistent with historic conditions and et cetera.
And then on top of that, Emily, the owner would still have to go through CDOT to get the curb cut and take away, and that would entail taking away a parking space on the street, if I understand that correctly.
Yeah, I'm sure he can speak to that, but that's what it looks like to me.
Okay, great. Well, Commissioner Hughes.
It's tough. Yeah. Is this their I'm sorry, is this their primary residence? I wish the owner.
The owner is here, so we can hear from the owner.
Okay.
You can ask that question of the owner directly. So.
Yeah, I'm not sure if they are wanting to speak, but is this their primary residence, and are they significantly altering, I guess, besides the small opening for the, it's not a small opening, but the opening for the garage, a 1-car garage, are they still going to be able to keep the rest of the facade intact?
Can I speak to that? I don't know if I've been unmuted yet by the officials, the moderators of this.
We are going to let you speak here.
Great. I
please.
just clicked unmute, so I appreciate
Okay.
everyone's time. Thank you very much for
Could
having
you
me.
announce yourself, sir?
Yeah, absolutely. My name is Andreas Mantius. I've been working with Emily very closely for the past probably year and a half or so, and I've started undertaking this project about 2 years ago.
And you're the owner?
I'm the owner, yeah.
Okay, thank you.
So thank you for asking that. And you had asked if it's a primary residence. It is my primary residence. I just travel a lot for work, hence I'm not in the apartment right now. So I'm actually split my time a lot between Chicago, Minneapolis, Miami, where the company I work for is based out of, Los Angeles, where I have a couple additional clients, and I think I mentioned Minneapolis, so from the Midwest originally. I just wanted to also continue on and or start. I won't take up too much time, but I know Ward Miller had started off maybe a couple hours ago stating that the Fullerton Parkway facade would have a garage entrance at the front, and that's not the case. The building, he's absolutely right, isn't an amazing structure. And if I can go ahead and present the presentation, Emily, that I've got, if you can share that, I'll start off on the first page.
Absolutely.
We can go to the next slide. If you take a look at the subject property that I have, I like to call this a super, super cool property. But as you can see, there's a stump at the bottom, and that was removed, or the tree was removed sometime last year, the year before. And it really exposed the deteriorated front building condition. So my goal is to make mine look similar to the one to the right of it in that picture. That's my neighbor Colleen's. She also did her building renovation through Landmark, and I'd like to do the same. Let me continue on. Let's go to the next slide if we may. The scope of my project is to do brick facade renovation, which, as Emily had mentioned, was already presented. I plan on replacing the existing windows and adding new additional windows, as well as adding a decorative window capstone or header to that. And then I am here in front of you requesting an off-street parking space. If we can go to the next one, the next slide, that would provide me with a one-car garage. Just a side note, I do already park a car on the street, so there's no net parking lost in total. It would prevent one additional car from being parked on the neighborhood streets. I'd have lighted walkways and sidewalks with the new lights on the side of the garage. All of the existing recycling bins and garbage cans I'd like to remove from the sidewalk and put them inside of the garage. And of course, the benefit is off-street parking for the owners. If we can continue to the next slide. The future vision for this, it's a long-term investment for me. I'm not here to flip it or make a quick sale. I want to do the restoration of the prominent corner lot. It's an absolutely beautiful building. If you drive by it, you'll see it, but it's an eyesore. And currently right now it's configured as a multi-unit property. So I can continue sharing the wonderful Lincoln Park location with the current tenants, or potentially convert it to a single family home. Next slide, if we may. If you take a look at the current proposed renovation, this is an architect rendering that on the left-hand side shows the existing screen door that's in deteriorated condition. It's a little bit rotting, and there's a glass block window right next to that. And what I'd like to do is convert it to the image on the right, where both of those openings are repurposed and set to the garage opening. On the next slide, if we can continue, is the very, very ugly, it speaks for itself. It's a bad siding. You can see that the masonry has been spalled with some stucco or some concrete slather. You've got a couple vent pipes that are sticking out of the side, and you can see all of the garbage bins that are placed on the side of the property. And I'd like to remove all those and just store them in the garage for additional sidewalk purpose. If we can continue on to the next slide, Emily did mention that there were a handful of other properties on corner lots that could potentially have a garage entrance. However, from the properties that I've researched on the screen, most of the ones on Geneva Terrace are directly in my area, as well as the two in the Belden Avenue. Lakeshore Drive and North State Street, as Emily rightfully pointed out, are not in the Mid-North District, but I did want to call out the clarifications just to show you in my wonderful 44-page document that probably makes for really good nighttime sleep, or it's a sleeping aid if you have troubles falling asleep at night. That actually shows a couple additional photos in there of essentially what other properties have that are on corner lots. If we can continue on to the next slide. The commission guideline calls out the the commission calls out for guidelines to new curb cuts, which is something that I'm absolutely taking into consideration. But on the next slide, the existing curb that's currently there, when Emily had presented all of the excavated sidewalk, the new concrete slab that they just dumped in has no elegance. There's no decorative ornamentation. They don't have the cardboard that separates the curb from the sidewalk. They literally just poured it in. And if you take a look at a Google Street View, you'll see that it's just a concrete slab right there. And additionally, I called out that there's no net parking lost as I park a car on the street. If we can continue into the next slide, this is a document that I found that shows additional curb cuts that were called out and granted to 558 West Belden, which is directly 2 blocks south of me. And they've done exactly the same thing that I want. The only little caveat is that they've repurposed a backyard, if you will, a little tiny garage parking space, or they've repurposed it as a garage parking space. And I'm sure from having researched those meeting notes, a lot of you probably are familiar with that because I've seen your names on that hearing. If we can continue on to the next slide, here's some photos along with the addresses for those curb cuts. If we can continue on to the slide after that, the first two in this are the two that I called out on the first slide, along with those photos. So this one, 2334 North Geneva, is exactly about a block south of me on the west side of Geneva Terrace, which becomes Larrabee in that area. And they've got a red garage door, as well as 555 West Belden, which is directly across the street from 558 Belden. And if we can continue on to the next question or the next slide. Emily mentioned that Alderman Michelle Smith did support did send a letter of concern. It may have been a letter of no support, and opposition, I think is the technical term for it. And I read through it, and it really, in my opinion, really seemed to stress the narrowness of the street. 558 Belden is on Geneva Terrace. That's a little wider. So that way there's the possibility of pulling in and out maybe a little more with ease. However, on Geneva Terrace in my area, there are existing alleys that seem to have no problem with entering and exiting, as well as the neighboring alley that's directly north of me that actually feeds the parking for the other 4 row houses next to mine. So they all each have essentially it's my lot times 2, because the building right behind mine or to the north side of mine would have kind of been initially, from my understanding, all one single building. That would have been my whole building, but back many, many years ago, they converted it into 2 separate properties and separated the living space. If we can continue on to the next slide, that shows that width right there, you can see that there is the same depression in the sidewalk, and it's just been paved over with asphalt. This is not my entrance, but that white building to the right of the screen is my neighbor's. I share a common wall, if you will, with her. And my understanding is that back in the good old days of the 1800s, that was part of my building. So it was all one big gigantic corner unit or corner building. And that said, right now, that little alleyway is the ingress and egress for the 4 row houses that are adjacent to mine, as well as the Greystone building that is pictured in this image. If we can continue on to the next slide. I hope I'm not going too fast. If I am, feel free to interject. So I want to respect everyone's time. This is the architect rendering. As you can see, there's an approximate 10-foot 4-inch wide garage. I did speak with Mid-North last night, and in fact, they were truly deadlocked. In full disclosure, they would not even provide me a letter of approval. They would not provide me with a letter of support. They would not provide me with a letter of no objection. But on the bright side, Melissa did tell me that she's like, we aren't even going to be taking a stance in this. So I'm kind of neutral, where with the Mid-North District, they didn't vote on this. They see where I'm coming from. They want this corner building to be renovated, which I would definitely love to undertake. And as Ms. Hughes mentioned earlier in the first meeting, you want to get people out there excited about preservation, and I want to preserve this. I feel like this building is in good hands with me. I don't want to go ahead and sell it, but I also don't want to dump a ton of money into brick and windows when there's no financial net benefit to the end. But I'm not here to talk about finances or any of that. But if you want to get people to be excited and get them willing to invest in their properties, I think any sort of incentives or carrots, if you will, to push them forward could certainly do that. So this is kind of my proposal. This is my carrot that would basically make me want to undertake the renovation of this building. Back to the architect rendering, you can see that the Geneva Terrace Street is relatively narrow. However, with the proposed curb cut, it is possible to ingress and egress. And if it's possible to go back one slide, if you take a look at that curb cut, it's not much more than 9 or 10 feet. It's maybe 12 feet at its widest. It's certainly not 24 feet. So if that's something that we can negotiate, you can see that at least 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, probably about 8 cars. The Greystone has, I think, a 4 or 5 parking lot behind it, and then the 4 next to mine. There's probably at least 8 cars that don't seem to have any problems entering and exiting that narrow driveway. And I can tell that because none of their cars seem to have gigantic scratches on the side. So they're definitely able to get in and out of that alleyway. If we can continue on to 2 more slides forward, I'd like to go to the Secretary of the Interior Preservation Guidelines. These came directly from their website. I will absolutely not do anything underneath the not recommended column. It's not my intent to do anything like that. As stated, no actions underneath the not renovated column will be performed. Streets don't need widening, and all of your lovely faces are covering with the video screen sharing. Parking areas will not be negatively impacted if looking from a neighborhood precedent with additional curb cuts that have already been either granted or that exist. I'd also furnish additional limestone around the garage. I'd add light fixtures next to the garage to light the public walkway. And then additionally, as mentioned, the sidewalk would be made a little more safe, especially possibly for those people in wheelchairs, or a lot of people have strollers, and trying to walk by the garbage cans is always a pain if you have either a double wide stroller or maybe those with wheelchairs. Nonetheless, my goal, again, not to take away any open space, and in fact, the public sidewalks could be made more safe in that argument. Next slide, if we may. Additional Secretary of Guidelines, I've highlighted out in yellow, additions for either alterations and additions for a new use. I'd like to repurpose the area of the proposed garage, which is currently a kitchen, as the new garage. Additionally, 558 Belden, which is the comp that I'm referring to, has incorporated multiple colors, materials, historic relationships with the neighborhood. A simple view of the add-on makes it stick out and show clear delineation between new and old. It looks good, in my opinion. I've argued before that maybe it doesn't look good, but if you take a look and truly just go by the recommendations, you can clearly tell that 558 Belden has the original white building, or has the stucco stuck on it, but the add-on is a clear delineation, which I like as well. Additionally, 560 West Fullerton's proposed garage add-on, my garage add-on, could be muted with minimal separation between old and new, while still maintaining the minimalist west side elevation. The garage is a repurposement of the existing openings, as I had mentioned, and with minor modifications, we can do it in a very unobtrusive manner. Additionally, we could make a variety of garage door designs. We can make them look modern. We could make them look more historic. I'll leave that up as absolutely something that I'm willing to work with you all on. I did get also a little consultation with some attorneys who work directly with Landmark buildings and additional developers, that they also believe that it was within the guidelines of the Secretary of the Interior. So if we can continue on to the next slide, I've just got some rebuttals or some rebuttals for points 2, 3, and 9 that Emily had called out. And on the next slide, if we can, the historic character of the property will be retained and preserved. My rebuttal to that is that I strongly believe, and I hope that I can convince all of you, that my architect renderings do show that the property will be retained and preserved. Additionally, if all of the brick on the front and new windows are added to the front and side is done, that building will look top notch. Additionally, no distinct materials will be removed. In fact, original materials like the limestone header on there would be repaired. If we can continue on to the next slide. Point number 3, each property will be recognized, as a physical record of its time, place, and use. So again, with that standard, no changes will be made, in my opinion, that could adversely affect the building. It would be repurposing 2 openings with the deteriorated wood door that's currently there and the glass block that are not characteristic. Depending on how you want to interpret it, the garage is not necessarily an additional or a conjectural feature, but an improvement on existing openings in the facade. And then the next slide calls out the last standard for new additions, interior and exterior alterations, or related new construction will not destroy historic materials, features, and spatial relationships that characterize the property. This one goes into a lot of depth, and I just called out a handful of bullet points. Last year, I submitted a brick masonry report that calls out evidence that I've provided that the standard is maintained. The ground level of the property has no visible historic materials that can be salvaged, let alone destroyed. If you look at the covering that's been slathered over it, and the brick masonry report did thoroughly examine the outer facade. And this should go without saying, any historic materials underneath that may be salvageable. Absolutely, I'd love to reuse those. There's multiple areas in the building or on the land, on the property, that I'd love to repurpose any of the brick that could be reused. I just hope that you don't make me reuse any of the glass block, because I think that looks a little bad. Nonetheless, new work such as adding the opening will differentiate from the old and new in what I'd like to do as a tasteful yet compatible manner. And then compatibility can be accomplished in many ways, adding an elegantly contrasting door, showcasing the craftsmanship and the historically updated characteristics of the building, along with the new brick facade, windows, capstones, lighting fixtures, and so forth. And then the last thing that I have for this is a question to you all, 2 questions actually. How does the repurposing of 2 openings fail to protect the integrity of the property and its environment? And that's something that I'd like to maybe have some thoughts on if you're interested in chiming in. But on the next slide, I've got 2 current letters of support. One additional is a day late and $1 short. Nonetheless, I'm going to submit it to Emily. One of the current tenants in the building, good friend of mine, I've known him for a few years, has not yet provided it, but he is interested in supporting my project as well. He's like, anything that can make this building look better, I'm absolutely in support of it. And I do have one specifically from a neighbor, Kathleen, who owns the white building just north of me. On the next slide, if we go into 558 West Belden, this is what they did. You can again see the delineation between old and new, and I'd like to do something similar to this project. Additionally, they've gone and did a curb cut that goes through not only the sidewalk, but it also goes through the boulevard. And I think that may have been, obviously it's done on purpose, but they're going through kind of a double whammy, if you will. They're crossing a longer distance or a depth, if you will, of the sidewalk, and they've taken away the boulevard space and placed a curb cut apron there. If we can continue on to the next slide, I found the meeting notes from a few years ago for landmark recommendations for the image and the property that I had mentioned above. Things to consider were whether or not the new curb cut has an adverse effect to the property and the district. And the staff recommends that the committee find 558 Belden's project, along with et cetera. They call out the same standards with the exception of standard number 3, which I have already reviewed. And additionally, a handful of other ones that they've satisfied. They've actually found that, well, you all have found that 558 does not have an adverse effect on 558 Belden. So you've got one proposed requirement on here that I've called out, that the 9-foot 2-inch wide curb cut and a 1-car garage. All you ask is that it be painted a dark color. I'm certainly willing to do that if you will allow me to do the same thing. If we can continue on to the next page, there's additional details in here for 558 West Belden. I'm going to be doing a lot of things that they're doing as well that rehabilitate the property. New windows, new capstones, and most importantly, the new brick. So that way it'll look absolutely gorgeous, in my opinion, and I hope you find that as well. So
Thank you, Ms. Whoops,
yeah,
sorry.
I've got only 2 more slides. One's very quickly. If we can continue on to the next slide. The only question that I'd have before you rule on this is that if you don't like my project or my proposition, I'd just like to know how 558 West Belden got approved and mine wouldn't get approved. And next slide is just a simple thank you. I really appreciate the time and getting to talk with all of you.
Thank you, Mr. Mantius. A lot of hands are raised.
I'm happy to take any questions. So
Commissioner Jakiewicz, you had your hand up for a while.
All right, thank you, Commissioner Wong. I guess I had a couple quick questions and clarifications. It probably was already said, but I just want to make sure I understand. So most of the buildings there have alley access with garbage and a garage. Is that correct? That little alley that you showed, or is that?
Yeah, that little alley.
Is there parking back there for the other structures?
There are. Yeah, there's other parking for the row houses next to mine.
All right, cool. Thank you. And then the garbage cans that you were mentioning, which I thought was an interesting argument. It doesn't seem to have a place in your plan right now. So I just think that you have to think about that a little bit, because it's an interesting argument that would be an improvement, but I don't see it in your proposal right now. So
the garbage cans being moved into the garage?
Correct. I didn't see them in the proposed plan.
Yeah, they weren't in the garage. I didn't have the architect sketch the garage.
It looks like it would be very tough to get them in there.
Yeah, and in fact, that's a really good point, even that Melissa and the Mid-North Association brought up. If we go, I won't make you take a look at the architect rendering, but if you go through the 44-page document, it's there. Or if you can bring it up, I'd love to see it. Again, that partition, that wall, I'm certainly willing to move it to make more space, less space. That's not a problem at all. It's just the architecture in that way.
I think it's an interesting argument. So I think it would just have to be something to, if you were gonna.
Okay, absolutely.
Pass, it might be something you have to work out. And then you still, just to understand that you still would have to get an approval from CDOT, right? No matter what?
Yes.
You haven't, okay. And then I guess the other just fleeting comment is if there were some way to incorporate a garage door in a tasteful way and careful way. I'm not sure about the design. I want to hear about the rest of the, from the rest of the commissioners, but, could there be a way that you actually could get to reconstruct the bay as part of, the proposal for that facade?
Reconstruct the bay in what sense?
Well, it looks like there used to be a bay on that facade, which would make it feel like more of a primary facade. And that has been lost. And I would just bring that up as a fleeting comment. Sure. If there was some way to, since other neighbors have an alley and have a place for garbage and have a place for parking, that if there were a way that if the commission felt that there might be an argument to incorporating a garage door, maybe there's a way that you actually can improve the facade by putting in a rebuilding the bay. And I'll just leave it there.
Yeah, the whole thing would be redone. The front and the side would be completely done with new windows as outlined on, I think, the fourth screen. So yeah, in the lower right-hand corner, all of the brick that you're currently looking at on my building, the first outer withe would be redone, and any brick that's there would currently be reused if it's in sufficient condition that I'd let an expert determine. But yeah, absolutely. I'm not just looking at putting a little garage there. This is the full project. This is west elevation, south elevation, new windows, and brand new capstones.
I understand.
Got it.
I would just like to reiterate real quick 2 things. One, that the permit for that work has been issued. It's good to go. We've got windows approved, etc.
Right.
The second being, I think it's important to remember that this could really set a precedent for dozens more curb cuts and garages into houses. Like I said, Mid-North and Arlington Deming right north, they're kind of characterized by these strange streets sometimes, and definitely by these corner buildings that are on both sides. I just want that to be considered. You're muted, I think, Ernie.
Thank you, Commissioner Hughes.
I think I was on mute too. Thank you, Commissioner Wong. My comments were actually echoing some of Commissioner Yankovic comments as well. The bay that he's referring to, I think that there's an opening in the sidewalk that used to house cold, and that was kind of referred to during one of the presentations. I'm sure directly on the facade adjacent to that opening used to be some sort of entry or some sort of access into the property as a working access, so you have it. So I think Yankovic was referring to finding the original service entry into that side and maybe echoing that in the design, which I agree with. My comments was, I think as a commission, we have to kind of take these on a case by case. Emily, I know what you're saying when you're saying there's dozens others that would probably come forward and want the same treatment, but this seems to be particularly unique to me, and not having alley access. And those trash cans and a lot of the views are just a huge eyesore in my opinion. And if there's a way that the owner can clean that up and help contribute to the neighborhood character and the walkability of the streets by removing those trash cans. And this is one of many reasons that I am wanting to compromise and hear the owner's point of view, because again, this would be a case by case for me. Just because I say yes to this case does not mean all 12 others that come forward would be a yes in their cases. So I think that you guys did your due diligence in trying to, or understanding that there's not a lot of wiggle room with him only having 2 facades. But because of that, I also would like to compromise and give a little for this owner to have car access to his property.
Did anybody else have any comments on this? Commissioner Gary.
Thank you. I was thinking along similarly, and I wanted to understand a little better. There are 2 items to this project. One is the curb cut that we already discussed. It's not necessarily up to this commission, but has to go also to Department of Transportation. But in general, the opening, it looks like a service entrance, and I wonder if there are some guidelines that we could reference to other than other projects that have done similar modifications and adjustments in the past, only because it might not have been the best solution, even though it was approved. So I'm just reflecting on, you know, the need for protected parking space, and also just generally the service area that this home doesn't have. but also thinking of what could be the design guidelines for that kind of adjustment. There's something with the design that, you know, it feels like there could be a solution that follows some of the lines, some of the alignments. I'm looking specifically to the elevation right now and trying to use more the aesthetic of the building itself. I'm just going to call real quickly. There's no curvatures in the existing design. There's a much more orthogonal line work and line of design. So I'm just thinking if there's anything that we could consider in terms of design guidelines specifically to support this application. I think this is not the first time that a lot of these conversations are going to be brought up, and I'm also thinking a little bit ahead.
Thank you, Commissioner Aguirre. My comment is, you know, it brings forth, Mr. Mantius, you bring up a very compelling argument for this. You've obviously done your homework. What struck me was the service entry, the glass block, which is just uncharacteristic. And as Commissioner Jakiewicz mentioned, those garbage cans are horrendous and need to be accounted for somehow, regardless of, you know, whatever you do, it's got to be accommodated. And to Commissioner Hughes' comment, it will be a great improvement for this community in this neighborhood. That being said, the two concerns I have is my understanding also is that there's a major cross slope in the sidewalk that would have to be accommodated for. And I believe your architect did accommodate for that. So it's not just taking out one space, it's really taking out two spaces if you have to widen that to that point. As you saw in the alley, that yellow stripe to get into the alley also takes up a space. So that 12-foot opening or width, it's actually 24 when you add in the yellow no parking area, so you can get a car into the alley. But that's not up to us. So I think that, you know, you're going to certainly have to bring forth your argument to CDOT if this is something that moves forward. Commissioner Osmond?
Yeah, my concern is the alderman has not approved this. I'd like to hear more about that because I respect Alderman Smith and I'd like to understand her concerns. And I think, Ernie, it might, Commissioner Wong, it might be getting into what you're saying is that her concern was just the narrowness and, you know, making the alley, like being able to make the turn. But is she really concerned that it's taking out additional size? It's not 10 feet, it's more like 24 feet that we're looking at. So can I call on staff? Like, do you know exactly what this was in terms of her disapproval?
We were given that information in our packet.
Emily, you're muted. Emily, were you saying something?
Then I can look at it, but I'm afraid that it's more relevant now that we're talking about.
So the letter came after the packet went out. We just received it right before the deadline on Tuesday. If I am not incorrect, it's that was one of the concerns. Another concern again was precedent, because she is the alderman for that whole area. And you know, it's great to have the building restored, but it almost feels like it's bargaining a little bit. They had multiple community meetings with Park West and Mid North, who also, as Andreas said, just couldn't come to a decision. And initially that's what they said too, but they changed their mind kind of at the last minute.
Commissioner Aguirre. Commissioner Aguirre?
Sorry. No, I wasn't raising my hand.
Okay.
Oh, I didn't put it down. Sorry.
Commissioner Jakiewicz.
I was making a separate, I was just gonna make another comment about, I'm not sure if this is gonna get passed or not, but if you could go back to the elevation really quick. So this elevation, if, I guess in either version, it bugs me with the door or with the, with the garage, just because you have kind of a gable at the top. So regardless, I think that you want to take those windows that are right underneath there and kind of try to line those up. And that may go to Commissioner Aguirre's comments earlier about things not quite lining up. But that, there's that if you look at in the 3D view as well, that I believe in the Sanborn map, there looked like there was a 3-dimensional bay that was actually projecting out. Am I wrong about that? Isn't that, yeah. So it looked like at one point, that's the same building, correct?
Yeah. So that's the bay that we were referring to. On the second and third floors there, like the neighboring building right there.
And there's no historic photographs of that, unfortunately, right?
I have scoured the entire internet for pictures of this building, and
I think that would be amazing if somehow we could find out how to reconstruct that as part of this. But
if you find those, please send them to me. I love having documentation of all historical stuff. My girlfriend's parents live in a historical building, and they've got the original photos from the 1920s of their house, and it gives me goosebumps actually, seeing that kind of the original build and the original design. So if you find those, pass them on, please.
Commissioner Hughes, you had your hand up.
Sorry, I think when depending on what our motion is today, we can request, the owner he sounded like he was pretty flexible in saying that he will shift the door or, aesthetically make alterations to fit to the aesthetic needs of keeping with the historic fabric of the building. So I don't think that, the design right now needs a little bit of work, but I don't think that he's opposed to any of that. And excuse me for speaking for you. You can chime in.
No, just bluntly, if I get the garage door, I'm flexible on everything.
All right. Here's our moment of truth, folks, because we've been talking about this and I think that it's been interesting to discuss this. Does anybody want to put forth a motion that is different from the staff recommendation? Put that out there.
I would like to put forward a motion to, in this particular case, to accept the owner putting in a garage door, one-car garage door on the side facade of this structure, and continuing to work with the commission throughout their rehabilitation process of this facade to work with us to get it to aesthetically speak to the historic fabric of this building.
Is there a second to that?
I second.
Okay, Commissioner Aguirre. Commissioner Jakiewicz.
I think that yes, I accept the motion, but maybe add, obviously that would mean that we would get to kind of review it again, because I think part of what makes it attractive is figuring out a solution for the garbage cans. And so really seeing that solution would be important.
I agree. I just want to make a quick comment. I think the design needs to be significantly improved. Commissioner Jakiewicz already mentioned, there are attributes to the building that could be stronger incorporated. So I will support that.
Okay, with recommendations. Okay, got it. And Commissioner Hughes, I believe that's what you meant anyway with your motion.
Yes, that is correct.
Okay. There was a motion and a second. I'm going to do roll call. Commissioner Osman,
So will we see this again? Because I just feel like we really want to, we want to see.
we
the
can make that as
garbage
part of
cans.
the, we can make that as part of the requirement.
I think it's got to be part of the
Okay.
requirement.
And Mr. Bentius, you're in agreement with that?
Absolutely.
Okay. So, okay.
And I
There's-
think my architect is listening to the live stream, so
Okay.
he's probably
All
hearing
right.
this as well.
So there's, as part of that motion, then the committee needs to see this again. So there's a motion on the table by Commissioner Hughes, second by Commissioner Gary. Commissioner Osman, you're saying,
If we're seeing it again, I will take it forward to the next meeting.
okay. Commissioner Jekovich,
Yes.
Commissioner Gary,
Yes.
Commissioner Hughes,
Agreed.
okay. I am going to vote that I'm present on this. So that's 4 in favor of that new motion and 1 that votes present. And please remember, this is, you may get shot down by CDOT anyway. So just to be,
Sure.
You're aware of that.
I don't know what their requirements are. That's, I guess,
Yep.
the next hurdle. So
I don't either.
to undertake that.
So Emily, you took all that down?
I got it.
All right. Thank you. With that, we are done for the day. And I appreciate everybody's time. It has been a long meeting. It's been the first virtual landmarks meeting. So I appreciate everybody's time to this. So with that, I'd call for a motion to end this meeting.
So move.
And second,
Second.
all in favor?
Aye.
Aye.